This 4-year-old beggar girl says to a millionaire, he said he's gonna throw hot water on me. What he does 30 minutes later will shock you. Comment what you think is going to happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sound of Italian loafers echoed through the polished marble of the office as Theodore Ted Vasconcelos, 52, paced back and forth like a caged lion. His hands trembled slightly as he held the contract he had just lost. $3 million that slipped through his fingers like fine sand. The company he'd built from the ground up, quarrying and processing marble from the mountains of Vermont, faced its biggest crisis in 2 decades. 25 years building this reputation, he muttered to himself, watching the city of Barre, Vermont, sprawling below from the panoramic window. The stones that had built his fortune now seemed like silent witnesses to his failure. His graying hair, always impeccably combed, was disheveled after hours of tense meetings. Ted was known in town not only for his wealth, but for his unyielding personality. A man of few words and many demands, he had created an empire based on pinpoint precision and absolute control. His employees respected and feared him in equal measure. Even at home, this rigidity manifested as armor that he could never quite remove. The phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was his assistant, Renee, her voice strained. "Mr. Vasconcelos, your wife called. She said dinner's on the table and you should have been home an hour ago." Claire, his wife of 25 years, who lately seemed more like a stranger living in the same house. Their relationship had become a cold dance of formalities, punctuated only by arguments about investments and social engagements. She had become a bitter woman, with a smile that never reached her eyes and an impressive ability to turn any conversation into a list of complaints. "Tell her I'm leaving now," Ted replied, hanging up the phone harder than necessary. He descended the 15 floors of the business building that bore his name, feeling the weight of each step. In the garage, he walked straight past the black Mercedes-Benz waiting for him and decided to walk. He needed fresh air, even if the air of Barre came loaded with the smell of marble and industrial dust. Main Street was busy that late afternoon. Shopkeepers were closing their stores. Workers were heading home, and the familiar sound of urban life created a chaotic symphony that usually irritated him. But that day, lost in his thoughts about lost contracts and missed opportunities, Ted barely noticed the movement around him. That's when he felt a soft touch on his sleeve. He looked down and saw a little girl, no more than 6 years old, with clothes so dirty that the original color was impossible to identify. Her dark hair was matted, her thin face marked by dirt, but it was her eyes that stopped Ted in his tracks. Large, brown eyes, full of a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone. "So young." "Please, mister," the girl whispered, holding out a small, dirty hand. "Just a dime." Ted had passed dozens of street children over the years. He always followed the same rule: ignore and keep walking. Giving money only encouraged begging, he used to think, but something about this girl made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the recent tears that still glistened on her cheeks, or the way she trembled slightly, even in the Vermont summer heat. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Isis," she replied, lowering her eyes. "Isis Santos." "And where are your parents, Isis?" The question made the girl flinch visibly. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if fearing to be overheard. "I don't have a mom or dad, mister, but there's Vinny who what?" Ted insisted, crouching down to her level. "He said he's going to throw hot water on me if I don't bring back any money today," Isis whispered, tears beginning to flow freely. "And I've already tried asking lots of people, but nobody gives me anything. Please, mister, just a little." The words hit Ted like a punch to the stomach. Hot water on a 6-year-old. He felt a rage he hadn't experienced in years, rising in his chest, mixed with something he couldn't identify, a primal revolt against the injustice he was witnessing. "Who is this Vinny?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Isis pointed discreetly to a skinny man about 40 years old, leaning against the wall of a building across the street. He was smoking a cheap cigarette and watching the scene with small, calculating eyes. Even from a distance, Ted could sense something sinister in the man's posture, in the way he watched the girl like a predator observing its prey. "Does he take care of you?" Ted asked, though he already knew the answer would be complicated. "He says he does," Isis replied, but he's not nice to me. And there are other kids too. They all have to bring back money every day, or else—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ted felt his blood boiling as he watched Vinny across the street. The man had noticed the extended conversation and was walking slowly toward them, the cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth in an expression of barely disguised irritation. Ted stood up and, without thinking twice, took his wallet from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out $200 bills and placed them in Isis's small hand. "Take this, and listen carefully. Nobody ever has the right to hurt you. Understand?" Isis's eyes widened at the sight of the money. It was probably more than she had ever seen together in her entire life. "Thank you, mister. Thank you so much." But as Vinny approached, the girl's joy turned back into fear. The man was even more unpleasant up close. Yellowed teeth, a strong smell of cheap alcohol and sweat, and eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating how much he could extract from each situation. "Isis, come here," Vinny called in a slurred voice. "And you, friend," he addressed Ted, "thanks for the generosity." Something about the way the man spoke made all of Ted's instincts bristle. There was a false subservience there, mixed with a poorly disguised threat. Ted looked at Isis, who had automatically positioned herself behind Vinny, and felt his heart clench at the sight of the fear in the child's eyes. "Where do you live?" Ted asked abruptly. Vinny smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why, the curiosity, boss? No need to worry about us. Isis here is well taken care of." The mocking tone of the response made Ted clench his fists. There was something deeply wrong with that situation, and every fiber of his being screamed for him not to let that child go away with that man. But what could he do? He was just a successful businessman, not a movie hero. "Isis," he said, ignoring Vinny completely. "If you need anything at all, I usually pass by here around this time." "Understand?" The girl nodded quickly, but Vinny grabbed her arm with a force that made her wince in pain. "Let's go, Isis. It's getting late," he said, pulling the child away. Ted stood on the sidewalk, watching the two of them walk away toward a narrow alley that led to the poorest neighborhoods of the city. Isis looked back once, and the look of gratitude mixed with despair that she gave him was etched in his mind like a brand. When he finally got home, Ted found Claire sitting at the dining table, methodically cutting a piece of already cold meat. She didn't even look up when he entered. "Your dinner's cold," she said, in the monotonous voice that had become her trademark. "But I imagine you don't care. After all, you've never cared much about what happens at home." Ted sat down without answering, but his mind was far away. He was thinking of a 6-year-old girl who trembled with fear when talking about hot water, and a man whose eyes promised violence. For the first time in years, his own comfort and his own problems seemed insignificant compared to the suffering he had witnessed. But what disturbed him most was the strange feeling he felt when thinking about Isis, as if that encounter wasn't casual, as if she were part of something bigger that he couldn't yet understand. Ted woke up several times that night, always with the image of Isis etched in his mind. The girl's brown eyes seemed to haunt him even in the darkness of the room, and every time he finally managed to fall asleep, he dreamed of a child's voice whispering about hot water and punishments. At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and got up to take a shower. Claire was still sleeping soundly on the other side of the king-size bed they had bought 5 years ago. Even asleep, she maintained a tense expression, as if arguing with someone in her dreams. Ted watched his wife's face for a moment, the wrinkles that had deepened in recent years, the mouth drawn into a permanent line of dissatisfaction. When had they become strangers, living in the same house? During breakfast, served promptly at 7 by Glenda, the maid who had worked with them for 15 years, Claire maintained her routine of reading the local news on her tablet while drinking. Black coffee without sugar. Her blonde hair, always impeccably styled, was pulled back into a rigid bun that made her face even more angular. "There's an interesting article here about the City Hall," she commented without looking up. "Looks like they're going to do a sweep of the downtown slums. It's about time. These lazy people are scaring away the tourists." Ted almost choked on his coffee. "What kind of sweep?" "Urban cleanup. They're going to remove those street children who are bothering decent people. It was time someone took action." The casual tone with which Claire spoke about removing children made Ted's stomach churn. "And where are these children going to go?" "That's not our problem," she replied, finally looking at him with an expression of irritation. "Ted, you've been acting strange since yesterday. Did something happen at the company?" He almost told her about Isis, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the coldness in Claire's tone, or maybe it was an instinct of protection that he didn't fully understand. "Just tired," he lied. But throughout the trip to the office, Ted couldn't stop thinking about the article Claire had mentioned. An urban cleanup operation. The phrase sounded sinister, as if the children were garbage to be discarded. What if Isis were caught in this operation? What would happen to her? He arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than usual and tried to focus on the numbers dancing on the computer screen. But with each passing minute, his anxiety increased. At 2 in the afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He told Renee he had an external meeting and left the building. Main Street was less busy at that time, with the strong midday sun keeping most people indoors. Ted walked slowly, observing every corner, every alley, looking for a 6-year-old girl who might not even show up. He spent 40 minutes walking back and forth when he finally saw her. Isis was sitting in the shade of an awning, her back against the wall, fiddling with something she was holding in her lap. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up with a smile that made Ted's heart clench. "Mister, you came back!" she exclaimed, getting up quickly. Ted noticed that she was wearing the same clothes as the day before, but she had tried to clean herself up. Her face was less dirty, and she had managed to tame her matted hair a little. "Of course I came back. How are you?" "Much better," Isis replied, showing what she was holding in her lap. It was a piece of cardboard and some broken crayons. "I managed to buy these crayons with a little of the money you gave me. Look what I drew." She turned the cardboard to him, revealing a surprisingly detailed drawing for a 6-year-old. It was a house, not a mansion or a fairy tale castle, but a simple house with a red door, blue windows, and a chimney from which white smoke was coming. Next to the house, there were 3 figures holding hands, 2 tall and 1 small in the middle. "It's very beautiful, Isis. Who are these people?" "It's a family," she replied simply. "The daddy, the mommy, and the little girl. They live in the house and they are happy." Ted felt a lump in his throat. "And where did you learn to draw so well?" Isis's face lit up even more. "The pretty lady with curly hair taught me. She used to teach me to draw and to read some little words too. She was very good to me." "What lady?" "She lived where I stay with Vinny, but she went away forever." Isis's tone became melancholic. She said she was going to a better place, but that I had to be strong and smart. When did this happen? A long time ago. I was even smaller. But I remember her because she used to sing me to sleep and give me food when I was hungry. Ted felt something strange stirring in his chest. There was something familiar in Isis's description of that lady, but he couldn't identify what. What did she look like? She had curly black hair, just like mine, but longer, and she had a little mark here on her chin, Isis said, pointing to her own face. And when she got nervous, she bit her lip like this. She demonstrated by biting her lower lip. Ted's blood ran cold, curly black hair, a small scar on her chin, the habit of biting her lip when nervous. These were characteristics he knew very well. Characteristics of his own daughter, Miriam, who had disappeared 2 years ago after a terrible fight that culminated in him shouting that she should never set foot in his house again. "Isis," he managed to say in a trembling voice, "do you remember that lady's name? She told me to call her Mimi, but one day I heard Vinny talking to other men, and he said her whole name, Miriam something." Ted had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Miriam. His daughter Miriam had been there in that filthy place, taking care of abandoned children. His daughter, whom he had kicked out of the house for dating a poor boy, had chosen to live in misery rather than return home and ask for forgiveness. "Mister, are you okay?" Isis asked, worried. "You've gone pale." I'm okay," he lied, trying to compose himself. "Isis, that Miriam, did you like her a lot?" "Yes, I did. She was like a big sister to me. She said that one day I was going to have a real family, that someone was going to love me and take care of me right. She always said that." The tears that Ted had repressed for 2 years finally began to stream down his face. There was the answer to all the sleepless nights he had spent wondering where his daughter was, if she was okay, if she would ever forgive him. Miriam had been there just a few miles from his house, taking care of needy children because that's how she was. Generous, caring, always concerned about the weakest. "Why are you crying?" Isis asked, approaching him with the innocent trust of a child. Because sometimes we discover things that change everything," he replied, wiping his eyes. "Isis, where is Vinny now?" "He only shows up in the afternoon to collect the money. In the morning and at noon he leaves us alone." "And where do you stay? Where do you sleep?" "In an ugly place in the back of the city. There are other kids too, but they're bigger than me. Vinny says we're a family, but it's not true. Family is like in my drawing." Ted looked again at Isis's drawing and felt a fierce determination growing in his chest. Miriam had taken care of that girl, had planted in her dreams of having a real family. Now it was up to him to honor his daughter's memory and protect the child she had loved. "Isis, would you like to see where I work?" Her eyes sparkled. "Can I really?" "Of course. But first, are you hungry?" "I'm always hungry," she replied honestly. Ted took her to a nearby diner and watched with a heavy heart as she devoured a simple sandwich as if it were the best food in the world. Every bite she took reminded him of the responsibility he now carried. Isis wasn't just a needy child who had crossed his path by chance. She was the last link he had to Miriam, the last chance of redemption that his daughter had left for him. But as he watched Isis eat, a shadow approached the diner window. Vinny was outside, watching them with an expression that mixed anger and something much more dangerous. His small, calculating eyes were fixed on Ted, as if he was assessing exactly how much he could extract from that situation. Ted felt a shiver run down his spine. He had gotten himself into something much more complicated than he imagined. Vinny Ribas was a 40-year-old man with a life wasted on vices and dubious schemes. His small, piercing eyes never missed an opportunity And watching that well-dressed man feeding Isis at the diner had triggered all his predatory instincts. He knew the types like Ted well, rich men who felt guilty about something and were willing to pay any price to ease their conscience. When Ted and Isis left the diner, Vinny followed them at a calculated distance. He saw how the businessman treated the girl with a gentleness he had never witnessed, how he spoke to her as an equal, how his eyes filled with tears when she told her stories. There was a vulnerability there that could be exploited. "Isis," he called when they got close to Main Street. "Where are you, girl?" Ted felt Isis's body stiffen beside him. The transformation was instantaneous. The happy, talkative child of minutes ago turned into a terrified little girl who automatically hid behind him. "She's with me," Ted said firmly as Vinny approached. "Ah, you're the gentleman from yesterday." Vinny smiled with that oily smile that didn't fool anyone. "Good to see you again. I came to thank you personally for yesterday's generosity. Isis came home very happy." "Home?" Ted repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "Well, let's just say it's what we have," Vinny laughed. "You know how it is. And tough times for those who didn't have the same opportunities in life. But we get by as we can." Ted immediately perceived the trap in Vinny's words. The man was testing him, probing to see how far he could go. "What kind of help do you need?" "Well, since you asked." Vinny scratched his stubble-covered chin, pretending to think. "The situation is complicated. The rent for the place where we stay is 3 months overdue. The landlord said that if we don't pay by Friday, he's going to throw us out on the street." "How much is it?" $500. "But there's also the issue of food for the other kids. Isis isn't the only one I look after, you know. I have a responsibility to 5 more boys and girls who have nobody else in the world." Ted felt the anger bubbling in his chest. The way Vinny talked about taking care of the children, as if he were a benefactor, when it was obvious he was exploiting them for his own benefit. "And how much would you need for food?" $300 would be enough for the week, Vinny replied, barely able to disguise the greed in his eyes. $800, Ted murmured, calculating quickly. To him, that amount was negligible, less than he spent on a single meal at expensive restaurants, but to Vinny it was probably more money than he saw in months. "You're a man with a good heart," Vinny said, holding out his dirty hand. "Isis is lucky to have found someone like you." Ted handed over the money, but his words were direct. "I want to know that this money is being used to take care of the children. All of them." "You can be sure, boss. Word of honor." But Ted wasn't a fool. He knew men like Vinny from the business world. They were like vultures, always looking for the next opportunity to profit. He knew those $800 would only be the beginning. "Isis," he said, crouching down to the girl's level, "I need to go to work now, but I'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Will you be here?" The girl glanced nervously at Vinny before answering. "If he lets me." "Of course, I'll let her," Vinny said quickly. "Isis is free to come and go as she pleases. We're not prisoners. We're a family." The word family, pronounced by that man, sounded like blasphemy to Ted's ears. He stood up and looked directly into Vinny's eyes. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock I'll be here, and I want to see Isis well taken care of." "You can count on it, boss. The girl is like my own daughter." Ted walked away with a heavy heart, but not before taking one last look at Isis. The girl watched him leave with an expression that mixed hope and fear, as if she feared that he, like so many others, would simply disappear from her life. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, Ted couldn't focus on anything. Isis's words about Miriam echoed in his mind like a broken record. Miriam had been there, had taken care of that child, had taught her to draw and dream of a family, and he, her own father, didn't even know where she was. The memory of the last fight with Miriam still tormented him. She had come home at 2 in the morning, holding hands with Brian, a humble guy who worked in a garage. Ted had exploded, shouting that he wouldn't accept his daughter lowering herself by dating someone without a future. Miriam had defended her boyfriend, saying that she loved him and didn't care about money. "You're being ridiculous," Ted had shouted, "wasting your life with this nobody." "At least he really loves me," Miriam had retorted, tears streaming down her face. "Not like you, who only knows how to love your money. Then go live your great love in poverty. But don't count on me to fund this madness. I don't need your help. I never need anything that comes from you again." Those had been the last words they exchanged. The next morning, Miriam had disappeared, taking only a small suitcase and leaving behind all the luxuries that Ted had provided her. He had hired private detectives, but she seemed to have vanished from the map. Brian had also disappeared from the city during the same period. Now Ted understood where his daughter had gone. She had chosen to live in misery, taking care of abandoned children, rather than return home and face her father's wounded pride. She had chosen love and solidarity instead of money and social status. When he got home that night, he found Claire in the living room, sipping a glass of white wine while watching a TV show about interior design. She didn't look up when he entered. "Home early tonight," she commented coldly. "Did something happen?" Ted sat down in the armchair opposite her, watching the woman with whom he had shared more than 2 decades of life. Claire had become a stranger to him, but there had been a time when they genuinely loved each other. They had dreamed together, built a life together, raised Miriam together. "Claire, do you ever think about Miriam?" The question made her raise her eyes from the TV for the first time. Her face hardened instantly. "Why are you asking that?" "Because she's our daughter. Because she's been missing for 2 years, and we haven't even tried to look for her properly. She chose to leave home," Claire replied, turning her attention back to the TV. "We gave her everything, and she chose to throw it all away because of some guy. If she wanted to come back, she knew where to find us." "What if she can't come back? What if something happened to her?" "Ted, have you been drinking?" Claire finally turned off the TV and stared at him. "Why this sudden interest in Miriam? You haven't talked about her in 2 years. "Because maybe I've been wrong. Maybe I should have gone after her, should have apologized." "Apologized?" Claire's voice rose in tone. "Apologized for what? For giving her the best education, the best clothes, the best life a child could have? For trying to protect her from getting involved with people who only wanted to take advantage of our situation? For not respecting her choices? For putting pride above love?" Claire stood up abruptly, spilling some of the wine on the Persian rug. "I can't believe you're doing this. We've spent 2 years rebuilding our lives, 2 years trying to forget her ingratitude, and now you come up with this nonsense?" "Claire! No, I'm not going through this again!" Her voice was trembling with anger. "Miriam made her choice. She abandoned us, Ted. It wasn't the other way around." She stormed out of the room, leaving Ted alone with his thoughts and his guilt. But now there was something different. Now there was Isis, a 6-year-old girl who had known Miriam, who had been loved by her. It was as if his daughter had left a message for him through that child, a last chance to make things right. Ted spent the night awake, planning how he would get Isis out of Vinny's hands, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Men like Vinny didn't easily give up a source of income, and Ted had just become the most promising source of income that parasite had ever found. But what he didn't know was that Vinny was already 3 steps ahead, planning how to turn that situation into a gold mine that would last much longer than a few sporadic payments. The tenement where Vinny kept the children was in a narrow, poorly lit alley, a 15-minute walk from downtown Bar. It was a 2-story building that had once been a boarding house for workers, but now housed entire families in tiny, unsanitary rooms. The smell of mold, sewage, and spoiled food permeated the air, mixed with the constant sounds of arguments, crying babies, and televisions on high volume. Isis shared a 30-square-foot room with 2 other children, Janie, 8, a skinny, distrustful girl who had learned to survive through cunning and toughness. And Pete, 10, a boy who had lost the ability to smile so long ago that he seemed to have forgotten how to do it. They all slept on torn mattresses thrown on the floor, covered by sheets that had once been white. "Isis brought money again," Janie commented that night, watching as Vinny counted and recounted the bills he had received from Ted. "Vinny is as happy as I don't remember ever seeing him." "It's because she found a sucker," Pete murmured, his voice laden with the premature bitterness of someone who had seen too much for his age. "There's always some rich guy who thinks he can save a child by giving money, then they get tired and disappear." "It's not like that," Isis protested, hugging the piece of cardboard with her drawings. "Mr. Vasconcelos is different. He looks me in the eyes when he talks to me, and he cried when I told him about Mimi." "Cried?" Janie raised an eyebrow. "Rich man doesn't cry for a poor child." "Yes, he did. I saw the tears running down his face." Pete shook his head in disbelief. "Isis, you're still too young to understand. These rich men only help when they can gain something from it. It may be to clear their conscience. It may be to appear in the newspaper. It may be for other worse reasons. But they always want something." "Mr. Vasconcelos isn't like that," Isis insisted, but her voice carried a hint of doubt that she herself didn't understand. While the children were talking, Vinny was downstairs at an improvised bar table, drinking moonshine with two men he knew from the days when he worked at the docks. Nivaldo, a bald, fat man who lived on small scams, and Wally, thin and nervous. Like a rat, a specialist in blackmailing people in compromising situations. "This guy is a big fish," Vinny was saying, lighting another cigarette. "Theodore Vasconcelos, owner of the largest marble company in the region, worth millions. And he's interested in the girl because of what?" Nivaldo asked, already calculating the possibilities. "I don't know, but he is. Gave $800 today without batting an eye, and from the way he looked at Isis, he'd give a lot more." Wally leaned over the table. "You have to be smart. Vinny, you can't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs all at once. You have to increase it little by little, create dependence." "I know what I'm doing," Vinny growled. "I've been living off this for years." "But you've never caught a fish this big," Nivaldo observed. "Rich man has power, has a lawyer, has influence. If you push it too hard, he can end you. That's why you need to be smart," Wally said, taking an old cell phone out of his pocket. "I know a guy who works with documentation. If we can get some photos of the rich guy with the girl, especially in private places, he'll pay any price to keep them from leaking." Vinny smiled his predatory smile. "Now you're talking my language." Meanwhile, a few miles away, Ted was dining alone at the table for 12 people in his dining room. Claire had gone out to the bridge class she attended every Wednesday, more as a way to maintain social appearances than for real pleasure. The 6,000-square-foot house was silent, echoing the steps of Glenda, who was clearing the dishes from the kitchen. Ted observed the environment around him. The expensive furniture, the paintings by renowned artists, the imported crystal chandelier that had cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything he had considered important for decades now seemed empty and meaningless. Isis had probably never slept in a real bed, let alone a house like that. He picked up the phone and dialed Robert Linhares, his personal lawyer for 15 years. Robert was a pragmatic and efficient man who had helped Ted grow his empire through smart contracts and impeccable legal strategies. "Ted, everything okay? It's late for you to be calling about business." "Robert, I need a consultation on a personal matter, hypothetical." "Go ahead." "If a person wanted to adopt a child who is in an irregular situation, let's say, what would be the procedure?" Robert was silent for a few seconds. "Ted, are you and Claire thinking about adoption?" "It's a complex situation. The child is with someone who clearly isn't able to take care of her properly." "Well, Legally speaking, if there is suspicion of abuse or neglect, the first step would be to contact Child Protective Services. They would conduct an investigation, and if the suspicions were confirmed, the child would be removed from the harmful environment, and then she would be placed in a temporary shelter while a suitable family is sought. If you were interested in adopting, you would have to register in the adoption queue, go through psychological and social evaluations. How long would that take? For a 6-year-old child, it could be quick or it could take months. It depends on many factors. Ted, do you want to tell me what the real situation is? Ted hesitated. Robert was discreet, but also too pragmatic to understand the emotional connection he felt with Isis. I found a child in a risky situation. I'm considering ways to help. My advice is, be careful. These situations can be more complicated than they seem. If you want to help, do it through official channels. Don't try to solve it alone. After hanging up, Ted walked around the empty house, thinking about Robert's words. Official channels meant bureaucracy, meant time, meant that Isis would continue in Vinny's hands for weeks or months, and he didn't know if the girl had that much time. The next morning, he arrived at the office determined to find a quicker solution. He spent 2 hours searching the internet for support homes for children at risk, private orphanages, anything that could get Isis out of that environment immediately. But all options ran into the same issue. He had no legal authority over the girl. At 2 in the afternoon, as promised, he was on Main Street. Isis was already waiting for him, sitting in the same place as the day before. But something was different. She seemed tenser, more frightened. "Hi, Isis, how are you?" "Hi, Mr. Vasconcelos," she replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Did something happen?" Isis looked nervously around before approaching him. "Vinny said that you were going to take me to your house today." "He said that?" "Yes, and he also said that if I wasn't good with you, he was going to punish me a lot when I got back." Ted's blood boiled. Vinny was clearly setting up some kind of trap, using Isis's innocence as bait. "Isis, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I would never do anything to hurt or scare you, understand?" "I understand. But Vinny said that all rich men are the same, that they always want something in return." "Vinny's wrong. Not all men are the same." At that moment, as if he had been summoned, Vinny appeared on the corner, walking towards them with a smile. That didn't fool anyone. But this time he wasn't alone. Wally was with him, pretending to read a newspaper, leaning against a magazine stand, but clearly watching every move. "Mr. Vasconcelos," Vinny greeted effusively. "What a joy to see you." "Again, Isis was looking forward to seeing you." "I'm sure she was," Ted replied coldly. "You know, talking to friends last night, I discovered that you are a very important person in the city. Theodore Vasconcelos, from Vasconcelos Marble. What an honor for us." The way Vinny pronounced his full name was a clear warning. He had done his homework. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. And if he knew who Ted was, he also knew how much he could extract from him. "Isis told me that you were interested in helping more. Maybe we could talk about that in private." Ted felt the ground moving beneath his feet. The trap was being set in front of him, and he didn't know how to escape without abandoning Isis, but he also couldn't fall for Vinny's blackmail. It was a dilemma that had no easy solution, and every second that passed made the situation more dangerous. Ted realized he was at a dangerous crossroads. Vinny had investigated him, knew of his wealth and influence, and was now preparing some kind of blackmail, but abandoning Isis at that moment would be betraying her in the same way he had betrayed Miriam years ago. "What kind of conversation do you have in mind?" Ted asked, keeping his voice firm. "Well, thinking more about the situation of the children, I realized that our need is greater than I imagined," Vinny said, lighting a cigarette. "The place where we're staying has serious problems in the structure. The city hall can condemn it at any moment." So? We would need a better place. Safer for the children. I was thinking of a rented house, nothing too expensive. $1,500 a month would be enough. Ted quickly did the math. Quickly did. $1,500 a month meant $18,000 a year. It was an amount that wouldn't make a difference in his budget, but it represented the establishment of a permanent dependence, and he knew that Vinny wouldn't stop there. Besides, Vinny continued, watching Ted's reaction closely. The children need clothes, medicine, school supplies. Isis is very smart, you saw. She deserves to study in a private school, have a better future. How much are you calculating in total? Vinny pretended to think, but it was obvious that he had already done the math a long time ago. 3,000. A month would be enough to take care of everyone properly. It's little for a man in your position, but it would mean everything to these children. $36,000 a year. Ted knew he was being extorted, but he also knew that refusing would mean leaving Isis in misery. It was exactly the situation Vinny had planned, a dilemma with no apparent way out. I need to think, Ted said. Of course. You're a busy man, I understand, but... And here Vinny's voice took on a darker tone. Unfortunately, time is running out. The owner said that if we don't resolve the situation by Friday, he's going to evict us. And then the children will really be on the street. It was Thursday. Vinny was pushing to have an answer in less than 24 hours. Isis, Ted said, crouching down to the girl's level, would you like to come with me for an ice cream? Her eyes sparkled, but she looked nervously at Vinny. Can I? Of course you can, Vinny replied quickly. Isis is free to go out with you. She just needs to be back before nightfall. Ted knew he was being watched, probably by Wally, who continued to pretend to read the newspaper, but he needed to talk to Isis away from Vinny's ears. He took her to an ice cream parlor in the center of town, a busy place where it would be difficult for any spy to disguise themselves. Isis chose a strawberry and chocolate ice cream and ate it with the same concentrated pleasure with which she had devoured the sandwich the day before. Isis, can I ask you some questions about Miriam? You can, she replied, licking her spoon. Do you remember anything else about her? Where she said she lived before, if she talked about family? Isis was thoughtful for a moment. She said she had a very angry father. She said he didn't like her boyfriend and that they fought badly. Ted's heart clenched. Did she tell you this? Sometimes, when she was sad. She cried secretly, thinking that we didn't see her, but I saw her. And one day I asked her why she was crying, then she told me. What else did she say about her father? That he had a lot of money, but he didn't have love in his heart. That he preferred money to her. Isis stopped eating and looked directly at Ted. Mr. Vasconcelos, do you have children? The question was like a stab. I had a daughter. What happened to her? We fought, and she left. You didn't go after her? No. I thought she would come back on her own. Isis was silent for a long moment, processing the information with the seriousness of a child who had seen too much for her age. Miriam used to say that sometimes parents do the wrong things because they're afraid of losing, afraid of not being important. She said that. Yes, and she also said that we have to forgive, even when it hurts a lot, because holding anger in your heart only hurts ourselves. Isis's words, echoing the wisdom that Miriam had shared with her, made Theodore's eyes fill with tears. His daughter had become a better person than he had ever been, even living in the misery that he had indirectly caused. Isis, if you could choose where to live, where would it be? In a house like in my drawing, with a family that truly loved me. She hesitated for a moment. Do you think that can happen one day? I think so, but it may take a while. That's okay. Miriam used to say that good things take a long time to arrive, but when they arrive, they're worth the wait. When they returned to Main Street, Vinny was waiting for them with barely disguised impatience. "Isis, I was getting worried." "Sorry for the delay," Ted said. "We lost track of time." "I imagine," Vinny smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Did you have time to think about our conversation?" "I did, and I agree to help financially." The relief on Vinny's face was instantaneous. "That's wonderful. You're a guardian angel to these children." "But I have some conditions." Vinny's expression changed slightly. "What kind of conditions?" "I want to see where the children are living. I want to make sure the money is being used properly." Of course. You can visit whenever you want. And I want Isis to start attending a school, a decent school." "Perfect. I was thinking about that myself. Tomorrow, I'll provide the $3,000 you mentioned, but I want receipts for everything that's spent." Vinny nodded enthusiastically, but Ted could see the gears turning in his mind. The man had gotten what he wanted, a permanent and generous source of income. But Ted was also planning. He needed time to find a legal way to get Isis out of that situation, and paying Vinny was a way to buy that time. That night at home, Ted told Claire about his decision to financially help some needy children. He omitted the details about Isis and Vinny, presenting the situation as a corporate charity action. $3,000 a month, Claire asked, frowning. "Ted, you're not the type to get involved with charity. Why this sudden change?" "Maybe it's time to give back a little of what life has given me." "Since when do you care about giving back anything?" The coldness in Claire's voice irritated him. "Claire, we're talking about needy children. I thought you'd support it." "I support helping those in need. I just find it strange that you're interested in this now. It has nothing to do with her, does it? With who? With Miriam. You're not trying to compensate for some guilt, are you?" Ted felt as if Claire had read his thoughts. "This has nothing to do with Miriam. It has everything to do with it. You woke up one day and decided to become a saint because you feel guilty about the way you treated our daughter, but helping strangers won't bring her back, Ted. I know that. Do you? Because the way you're acting, it seems like you're trying to adopt all the lost children of Bara to replace the one you lost." Claire's accusation was more accurate than she imagined, but Ted couldn't admit it. "I'm going to help these children. Claire, with or without your approval. Do whatever you want, but don't ask me to participate in this late-life crisis of yours." She left the room, leaving Ted alone with his thoughts and his guilt. But for the first time in 2 years he felt he was doing something that Miriam would approve of, and that gave him a peace that he hadn't experienced in a long time. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, Vinny was meeting with Wally at a dirty bar table, planning how to turn those $3,000 a month into something much bigger. And that Isis, on her torn mattress in the tenement, was holding a small object that she had kept for years, a silver ring that Miriam had given her before leaving, saying that one day it would help her find her true family. On Friday morning, Ted withdrew the $3,000 from the bank and kept them in a sealed envelope. But before meeting Vinny, he decided to do something he had been planning since the previous night: a surprise visit to the tenement where the children lived. He wanted to see with his own eyes the conditions in which Isis lived. The alley where the tenement was located was even worse during the day. The sunlight revealed details that the darkness of the previous night had masked. Open sewage running between the uneven stones of the ground, garbage piled up in every corner, walls peeled and stained by moisture. The smell of poverty and abandonment was almost tangible. Ted climbed the external staircase that led to the second floor, where Vinny had said the children were. The rotten wooden steps creaked under his weight, and he wondered how that structure was still standing. When he reached the top, he heard children's voices coming from one of the rooms. The door was ajar, and he could see Isis sitting on the floor with two other children sharing a piece of dry bread. The room was tiny, with moldy walls, and just a small window that barely let in any light. 3 torn mattresses occupied almost all the available space. "Isis?" he called softly. The girl looked up and her face lit up. "Mr. Vasconcelos, how did you find this place?" "Vinny explained to me how to get here," he lied, not wanting to worry her. The other 2 children hid behind Isis. The older girl, who must have been about 8 years old, watched him with suspicion, while the boy seemed terrified by the presence of a stranger. "These are Janie and Pete," Isis introduced. "They live here with me." "Hi," Ted said, trying to look less imposing. "Isis talks about you a lot." Janie took a step forward, protecting the other 2. "Are you the rich man who's been giving money to Vinny?" "I'm a friend of Isis," Ted replied carefully. "Vinny said that you were going to take Isis away from here. Is that true?" The question caught Ted off guard. Why did he say that? Because he always says that one day someone will show up to take us away, but it never happens. People always promise and then disappear. Ted felt the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. Those children had been disappointed so many times that they couldn't even believe in adults' promises anymore. "Where is Vinny now?" he asked. "He left early," Pete replied, speaking for the first time. "Said he was going to take care of some important business." "And you guys are alone?" "We take care of each other," Janie said proudly. "We don't need him for anything. Isis told me that you're very close." "We have to be," Janie explained. "When there's no one else in the world, all that's left is us." The 8-year-old girl's words had a bitter wisdom that made Ted's heart clench. Those children had lost their innocence too early, forced to mature at a cruel speed. "Can I sit with you?" he asked. Janie hesitated, but Isis gestured for him to join them on the floor. Ted sat on the least damaged mattress, trying not to show the disgust he felt for the environment. "Isis showed me some very beautiful drawings she made. Do you guys like to draw too?" "We don't have supplies," Pete said. "Isis only got the crayons because you gave her money." "And before that? How did you have fun?" "Miriam used to bring us things," Janie said, and the name made Ted stiffen. "She always had something in her bag, pencils, paper, sometimes even little storybooks." "You guys knew Miriam?" "Of course. She stayed here for almost 2 years. She was the only adult who really liked us." "What was she like?" "She was cool," Pete said, and for the first time Ted saw a glimmer of affection in his eyes. "She didn't yell at us, didn't hit us, didn't swear, and she always shared everything she had. She used to tell us stories to fall asleep," Janie added, "stories of children who found happy families and went to live in houses with a garden." "What happened to her?" The 3 children were silent for a moment. It was Isis who finally answered. "She got sick. She coughed a lot. She had a fever, but she didn't want to go to the doctor." "Why?" "She was afraid," Janie said. "She always said that if someone found out where she was, she would be in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "I don't know, but she always got nervous when she saw a cop on the street, or when someone asked questions about her." Ted felt a knot in his throat. Miriam had spent 2 years living as a fugitive, afraid of being found, and he hadn't even looked properly, convinced that she would come back when she came to her senses. "In her last days she got very weak," Isis continued. "She could barely get up, but she still shared the food with us. She said that if anything happened to her, we had to be strong," Pete said. "That one day someone would show up to take care of us for real." "Did you believe it?" "We wanted to believe it," Janie replied. "But when she left, we realized it was just a story." "Left how?" "One morning she didn't wake up. Mrs. Josephine, who took care of us before Vinny, said she had gone to a better place. Ted closed his eyes, trying to control his emotion. Miriam had left alone in a filthy bed, surrounded only by abandoned children. And he was in his mansion, worried about contracts and business, with no idea of his own daughter's suffering. "Mr. Vasconcelos, are you okay?" Isis asked, gently touching his arm. "I am," he lied. "I'm just thinking about Miriam." "Did you know her?" Isis's simple question opened a wound that Ted had been trying to keep closed for 2 years. "I did. She was very special to me." "She left something for you," Isis said suddenly. "How?" "In her last days, she kept looking at a photo. She said it was of someone very important, that she loved very much, even angry with him." Isis got up and went to a corner of the room, where she dug among the few belongings she had. She came back holding something small wrapped in a piece of cloth. "She gave me this and told me to keep it. She said that one day I would know who to give it to." With trembling hands, Ted unwrapped the object. It was a small ring made of silver, with a blue stone in the center. He recognized it immediately. It was the graduation ring he had given Miriam when she finished high school. Engraved on the inside was written, "To my princess, with love, Dad." The ring trembled in his hands as tears streamed down his face. Miriam had kept that ring even after everything, even after the fight, even living in misery. She had kept it, as a reminder of the father who loved her, despite everything. "Why are you giving me this?" he managed to ask. "Because I think it's yours," Isis said simply. "It looks like something important, and Miriam always said that important things have to go back to who they belong to." Ted pressed the ring against his chest, feeling as if Miriam were there, forgiving him through that 6-year-old child she had loved like a sister. At that moment, heavy steps echoed on the stairs. Vinny was coming back, and from the accelerated way he climbed the steps, he was clearly agitated. "Hide this," Ted whispered quickly, returning the ring to Isis. "Don't let him know you gave it to me." Isis nodded and hid the ring in the same place where she had taken it from, seconds before Vinny appeared at the door. "Mr. Vasconcelos, what a surprise to find you here," Vinny said, but his tone didn't hide his irritation. "Isis didn't tell me you were coming." "I decided to pay a surprise visit to get a better understanding of the children's situation," Ted replied, trying to keep his voice firm. "And what did you think?" Ted looked around the miserable room at the 3 children who were watching him with a mixture of hope and fear, and felt a fierce determination growing in his chest. "I think it's time to change a few things around here." During the following week, Ted established a routine that consumed him completely. Every morning, before going to the office, he would stop by the tenement to see the children. He would bring fruits, fresh bread, milk, small gifts that made their eyes shine. But mainly he brought attention, something they didn't receive from anyone else. Vinny initially tried to control these visits, always showing up in the middle of the conversations, with flimsy excuses about urgent commitments he needed to resolve with Ted. But the businessman soon realized the game and started to vary the times of his visits, arriving sometimes at 7 in the morning, other times at noon, always catching Vinny by surprise. "Mr. Vasconcelos is dedicating himself a lot to the children," Vinny commented one morning while counting the bills of the weekly payment. "That's very nice to see." "It's my duty to ensure that they're well," Ted replied dryly. Of course. I just don't think you need to come every day. The children can become too dependent, you know how it is." "Dependent on what? On affection? On attention?" "It's not that. It's just that, well, you're a very busy man, and people may start talking." "Talking what?" Vinny gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Bar is a small town, Mr. Vasconcelos. People like to make up stories. A rich man visiting poor children every day. It can give rise to wrong interpretations. The threat was clear. Vinny was planting the seed of the blackmail that would come later, the suggestion that Ted's constant visits could be misinterpreted by local society. "Let people talk whatever they want," Ted said, but inside he felt a chill. He knew that Vinny was right about one thing. In a town like Bar, where everyone knew each other, his daily visits to the tenement would eventually draw attention. That afternoon, at the office, Ted received a call that confirmed his worst fears. It was Mark Ribeiro, president of the Chamber of Commerce and one of the most influential men in the city. "Ted, my friend, how are you? It's been a while since we've talked properly." "Mark, what a surprise. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's more a matter of curiosity. There are some comments circulating in the city about you getting involved with social work. Is that true?" Ted felt his stomach churn. The gossip had already started. "I'm helping some needy children." "Yes, that's great. I always knew you had a generous heart. But my friend, you know how people are. Some are saying that you've been visiting a tenement in the back of the city, alone. And what's the problem?" "Ted, for God's sake, you're one of the most respected businessmen in the region. You can't expose yourself like that. If you want to do charity, there are more appropriate ways." "Appropriate for whom?" "For your social position, for your reputation, for your company." The call ended with Mark suggesting that Ted be careful, and that if he wanted to continue helping children, he should do it through established institutions. But Ted knew it was too late to back down. The seeds of gossip had already been planted, and in small towns, gossip grew faster than weeds. When he got home that night, he found Claire waiting for him in the living room with an expression he hadn't seen in years, a mixture of anger and despair that made him stop at the door. "We need to talk," she said, getting up from the armchair. "About what?" "About the fact that you've become the subject of gossip in the entire city." Ted sat down heavily. "Who told you?" "Regina Montero called me today. Said the whole bridge group is commenting that you've been visiting street children, alone, every day." "And what's the problem?" "What's the problem?" Claire's voice rose, in tone. "Ted, have you completely lost your mind? Do you know what people are insinuating?" "What are they insinuating?" "That a 52-year-old man who visits children every day must have questionable motives." The accusation hit Ted like a punch to the stomach. "That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, but it's what they're saying. And you know that in a town like this, reputation is everything. If that gossip spreads, it can destroy everything we've built." "Claire, I'm just helping needy children." "Helping how? Why can't you do it through the church or some institution? Why does it have to be personally every day?" Ted couldn't explain about Isis, about Miriam, about the ring he now kept in a drawer in the office, as if it were a treasure, because those children need individual attention. "One child specifically, isn't it?" Claire's voice became dangerously low. "Regina said that you've been focusing on one specific girl, a 6-year-old girl." "Claire. My God, Ted. Are you trying to replace Miriam with a street child?" "It's not that." "It's exactly that. You feel guilty about our daughter leaving, so you decided to adopt a substitute. But you can't do that. You can't destroy our life because of a fantasy." The argument continued until late at night, with Claire demanding that he stop the visits and Ted refusing to abandon the children. It was the first time in years that they had really fought, screamed at each other, exposed the wounds they kept carefully hidden. "If you continue with this," Claire said finally, "you'll have to choose between those children and our marriage." "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "I'm giving you an opportunity to stop this madness before it's too late." The next morning, Ted arrived at the tenement earlier than ever, still shaken by the fight with Claire. He found Isis awake, sitting in the small window of the room, watching the street traffic below. "Good morning, Mr. Vasconcelos," she said, but her voice was different, sadder. "Good morning, my dear. Did something happen?" "Vinny said that you may stop coming here." "He said that? He said that people are talking badly about you because of us, that it can harm your business." Ted felt the anger explode in his chest. Vinny had told a 6-year-old child that she was a burden, a problem in his life. "Isis, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you," he said, crouching down in front of her. "I'm not going to stop coming here, no matter what people say. But what if it hurts you? You are more important than any business. Are you sure?" Isis's simple question enclosed all the insecurity of a child who had been abandoned so many times that she could no longer believe in adults' promises. "I'm absolutely sure," Ted replied, and for the first time since he had met Isis, he felt that he was being completely honest. But that afternoon, when he returned to the office, he found a situation that would change everything. Renee was waiting for him with a pale face, holding an envelope that had been delivered by a messenger. "Mr. Vasconcelos, this arrived for you." The messenger said it was urgent. Inside the envelope were 3 photographs. The first showed Ted entering the tenement. The second showed him talking to Isis at the ice cream parlor. The third, the most compromising, showed him hugging the girl after she had given him Miriam's ring. Along with the photos, there was a handwritten note. "People will be very interested to see these images unless we can reach a more generous agreement. $3,000 a month is getting a little low to maintain our discretion." It was signed, only with a V. Ted sat down in his executive chair, staring at the photographs that could destroy not only his reputation, but his entire life. Vinny had carried out his threat. The blackmail had officially begun. But what disturbed him most wasn't the money Vinny was asking for, or even the threat to his reputation. It was the realization that those photos, seen by malicious eyes, could really be interpreted in the wrong way, and that meant that continuing to visit Isis had become impossible. For the first time since he had met the girl, Ted seriously considered the possibility of doing what everyone expected of him, paying Vinny and walking away, returning to his comfortable life and leaving Isis to her own fate. But then he remembered Miriam's ring, the trust in Isis's eyes, the words of forgiveness that his daughter had left through that child. And he knew that, regardless of the price he had to pay, he couldn't abandon her. The war had officially begun. For 3 days, Ted didn't show up at the tenement. 3 days that seemed like 3 years to Isis, who stood at the small window of the room, waiting to see the familiar figure walking down the alley. Pete and Janie tried to console her, but they themselves had predicted that outcome. Another adult who had promised to take care of them and then simply disappeared. Vinny was euphoric. The plan had worked perfectly. Ted had received the photos and immediately stopped the visits. Now it was just a matter of time until he agreed to pay the higher amount to keep his reputation intact. "See how easy it was?" he boasted to Wally at a table in the bar. "Rich people are all the same. When they see their reputation at risk, they run faster than rabbits." "And now, how much are you going to ask for?" Wally asked, counting the coins he had received for the photos. "I'm going to start slow. 5,000 a month. Then when he gets used to it, I'll raise it. In 6 months, I'll be pulling in 10,000. And if he doesn't pay, he'll pay. A man like him can't afford to have his name tarnished in a small town." But Vinny didn't really know Theodore Vasconcelos. During those 3 days of absence, the businessman wasn't hiding in fear. He was planning. The first step was to hire a private investigator, not to investigate Vinny. That would be too obvious, but to investigate the legal situation of the children in the tenement, who they were, where they came from, if there were families looking for them. The second step was more painful. An honest conversation with Robert Linhares about the whole situation. Ted told him everything about ISIS, about the connection with Miriam, about the blackmail. Robert listened in silence, taking precise notes. "Ted, you've gotten yourself into a serious mess," Robert said when he finished. "But it's not impossible to solve." "What do you suggest?" "First, don't pay a penny more to this Vinny. That will only confirm that he has power over you. Second, we need to document the children's situation. If we can prove that they are being neglected or exploited, we can use that against him." "And the photos?" "The photos are a problem, but not insurmountable. What you were doing was helping needy children. That can be documented, proven. Any sensible person would understand. In a small town, not all people are sensible. That's why we're going to anticipate. We're going to be the first to tell the story in the right way." The third step was the most difficult, a conversation with Claire about what was really happening. Ted arrived home on Thursday night determined to be completely honest with his wife. "Claire, I need to tell you something important." She was organizing papers on the table in the living room. Bills, bank statements, the administrative routine of a comfortable life. "If it's about those children again, Ted, I've already said I don't want to hear it. It's about Miriam." Claire's hands stopped in mid-movement. She slowly raised her eyes. "What about Miriam? The girl I'm helping. She knew our daughter." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Claire dropped the papers and sat down heavily in the chair. "How do you mean, knew?" Ted told her everything. About ISIS having lived in the same place as Miriam. About the stories the girl told. About the ring. Claire listened without interrupting, her face going through a range of emotions: surprise, pain, anger, and finally a deep sadness. "You're telling me that our daughter lived for 2 years in a filthy tenement?" she asked in a trembling voice. "I am." "And that you knew about it and didn't tell me?" "I found out a short time ago. And I didn't know how to tell me that our daughter preferred to live in misery rather than come home." Claire stood up abruptly. "How to tell me that she spent the last years of her life taking care of abandoned children while we pretended she didn't exist?" "Claire, no!" she screamed, the tears finally welling up. "You don't have the right to give me this news as if it were something casual. Our daughter left hating us, Ted. She preferred poverty to our company." The pain in Claire's voice was palpable. For 2 years, she had built a narrative where Miriam was the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them. Discovering that in fact she had chosen a life of sacrifice and service completely destroyed that version of the facts. "That's why I'm helping ISIS," Ted said softly. "Because she was important to Miriam. Because through her I can honor our daughter's memory." "Honor?" Claire laughed bitterly. "Do you think taking care of a strange child will bring Miriam back?" "No. But maybe it will make me feel like I haven't completely failed as a father." "We failed, Ted. Both of us. And nothing we do now will change that." That night they cried together for the first time in 2 years. They cried for the daughter they had lost, for the words they could never say, for the pride that had separated them when it should have united them. The next day, a Friday, Ted returned to the tenement. But this time, he wasn't alone. Robert accompanied him along with a social worker he had hired to assess the children's conditions. Isis was in the same place as always, at the window, but when she saw Ted appear in the alley, she ran down the rotten stairs and threw herself into his arms with a force that almost knocked him down. "Mr. Vasconcelos, I knew you would come back." "I knew it. Of course I came back," he said, hugging her tightly. "I promised I wouldn't abandon you. Vinny said that you wouldn't show up anymore. Said that rich men always do that, pretend they like us and then disappear. Vinny is wrong. I know. I always knew you were different." The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Carmen Santos, documented everything with the efficiency of someone who had seen many similar situations. The deplorable conditions of the tenement, the obvious neglect, the physical and emotional state of the children. Everything was photographed and noted in detail. When Vinny finally appeared, he found a situation very different from what he expected. Instead of a cornered and ready-to-negotiate Ted, he found a businessman, accompanied by a lawyer and a social worker, clearly prepared for a legal battle. "Mr. Vasconcelos, what a joy to see you again," Vinny said, but his voice trembled slightly. "Who are your friends?" "People interested in the well-being of the children," Ted replied coldly. "Vinny Rebus?" Robert asked, consulting his papers. "I have some questions to ask." "What kind of questions?" "About your legal authority over these children, about the living conditions you're providing, about the destination of the money you've been receiving to take care of them." Vinny paled. I take good care of the children. I do the best I can." "Carmen," Robert said to the social worker, "can you present your preliminary observations?" Carmen read a devastating list. Evident malnutrition in the 3 children, deplorable sanitary conditions, absence of basic medical care, lack of school documentation. This is persecution," Vinny protested. "I'm a working man trying to help needy children." "Then you'll have no problem showing us the receipts of how you spent the money you received to take care of them," Robert said, extending a folder. "Here is a court order requesting all the documentation." Vinny took the papers with trembling hands. He knew he didn't have any documentation because he had spent everything on drinking and gambling. I need time to organize." "You have 48 hours, Robert said, "and in the meantime, the children will be under temporary protection." "Protection from whom?" "Mine," Ted said firmly, "with temporary judicial authorization." Vinny's world collapsed in a matter of minutes. The children who were his source of income, the blackmail scheme he had planned, everything was crumbling before his eyes. But he still had an ace up his sleeve. "Mr. Vasconcelos," he said with a malicious smile, "I think you're forgetting some interesting photographs that I have stored." "You mean these?" Robert took out of his folder copies of the same photos that Vinny had used to blackmail Ted. They were delivered anonymously to the district attorney's office yesterday, along with a detailed complaint about child exploitation and attempted extortion. Vinny went livid. "How did you—" "We anticipated your move," Robert explained. "And now those photos are evidence in a criminal case against you." At that moment, Isis approached Ted and held his hand. "Mr. Vasconcelos, does that mean we're leaving here?" "It means," he replied, looking directly at Vinny, "you're going to a much better place." Vinny knew he had lost. Completely. Not only the children and the money, but now he would face prosecution for child exploitation and attempted extortion. He saw his last opportunity for an easy life slip through his fingers like sand. But neither Ted nor Robert knew that Vinny still had allies in town, people who wouldn't like to see a scandal involving one of Bar's most prominent businessmen, and who would do anything to protect the established social order. The house that Ted rented for the 3 children was in a lower middle-class neighborhood, away from the city center and curious eyes. It was a simple 3-bedroom construction, but for Isis, Janie, and Pete, it seemed like a palace. For the first time in their lives, each would have their own bed, with clean sheets and soft pillows. Carmen Santos was assigned as a temporary caregiver, while the legal custody proceedings unfolded. She was an experienced woman who had worked with traumatized children for 15 years and knew exactly how to deal with the distrust and fear that still dominated the little ones. "You can explore the whole house," she said on the first day. "Everything here is yours." But the children remained grouped in the living room, as if fearing that it was too temporary to get used to. Janie maintained her protective posture, watching Carmen's every move with suspicion. Pete said nothing, just holding Isis's hand as if she were his only anchor in the world. "Are you afraid I'm going to leave?" Carmen asked gently. "Everyone leaves," Janie murmured. "Always. I'm not going anywhere, and Mr. Vasconcelos neither." "How do you know?" the 8-year-old challenged. "Because he's paying a whole year's rent on this house, and because I've never seen a man dedicate himself so much to children, who weren't even his family." It was Isis who broke the ice first. She let go of Pete and walked to the living room window, which overlooked a small yard with green grass and some fruit trees. "Look!" she exclaimed. "There are real birds here." It was a mockingbird that had landed on the branch of a mango tree. Isis opened the window and watched the bird sing, with her eyes shining in a way that Carmen hadn't seen yet. "Do you like birds?" the caregiver asked. "I like them a lot. Miriam used to say that they are free to go wherever they want." The mention of Miriam made Carmen pay more attention. Ted had briefly told her about the connection between Isis and his daughter, but hadn't gone into details. "Who was Miriam?" "She was a very good girl who took care of us in the bad place. She taught me to draw and to dream of beautiful things." "And what happened to her?" Isis was quiet for a moment, watching the mockingbird. "She went to heaven. But when she left, she gave me something very important to keep." That afternoon, when Ted came to visit the children in the new house, he found a scene that moved him deeply. Isis was in the yard, drawing in a new notebook that Carmen had bought, while Janie and Pete played timidly on an old seesaw that the former tenant had left behind. "How are you adapting?" he asked. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever lived," Isis replied, running to hug him. "There's hot water in the shower and a refrigerator that works. And you, Janie and Pete, are you liking it?" Janie nodded hesitantly. "It's good, but how long are we going to stay here?" "As long as you need. And if the money runs out, it won't run out." "How can you be sure?" Ted knelt down to her height. "Because you are my responsibility now. And I've never abandoned a responsibility in my life." But while the children were starting to adapt to their new life, Ted's problems in local society were intensifying. During the weekend, he received 3 calls from business associates concerned about the direction his life was taking. The most incisive came from August Magalhaes, owner of the largest construction company in the region and a historical competitor of Ted. "Ted, we need to talk. There are rumors circulating that aren't doing well for you or our business class." "What rumors?" "About you getting involved with irregular situations involving minors. It's tarnishing the reputation of all of us." "August, I'm just helping needy children through the appropriate legal channels." "I know that, but the public perception is different. People are commenting that you rented a house for them, that you visit daily, that you have a favorite among them." "A favorite?" "A 6-year-old girl. They say you have a morbid obsession with her." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with August suggesting that Ted distance himself from the situation before it irreversibly harmed his reputation. When he hung up the phone, Ted realized that he was facing something bigger than simple small-town gossip. On Monday, the situation worsened. 3 important customers cancelled contracts, claiming internal restructurings. Ted knew it was a lie. He was being boycotted by part of the local business elite. "Renee," he called his assistant, "schedule a meeting with the company's 5 largest customers. I want to understand exactly what's going on. Mr. Vasconcelos, I've already tried. 2 said they were too busy for meetings. The other 3 didn't even return the calls." It was a situation that Ted had never faced. During 25 years of building his empire, he had always counted on the respect and admiration of the business community. Now, for helping 3 abandoned children, he was being treated like a pariah. That afternoon, when he went to visit the children, he found Isis drawing at the kitchen table. It was a different drawing from the previous ones. It showed a man in a suit next to a little girl, but both were surrounded by shadowy figures who pointed accusing fingers at them. "What drawing is this, Isis?" "It's you and me. But there are angry people with us." "Why did you draw angry people?" "Because Mrs. Carmen talked on the phone earlier today. She was worried. She said that there are people saying bad things about you because of us." Ted felt a squeeze in his chest. "And what do you think about that?" "I think that people don't really know you. If they did, they would know that you are good." "Isis, are you afraid that I'll stop coming here because of those angry people?" The girl stopped drawing and looked directly at him. "Yes, everyone always leaves when things get difficult. I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" "I promise." But even making the promise, Ted knew that the situation was becoming dangerously complicated. That night, he received a call from Robert with disturbing news. "Ted, we have a problem. I received information that there is an organized movement to question your mental competence." "How so?" "Some businessmen in the city are alleging that you have developed a morbid obsession with children, that you may be suffering from some psychological disorder." "That's ridiculous." "It's ridiculous, but it can be effective. If they can convince a judge that you're not in adequate mental condition, they can challenge your temporary custody of the children. And then they would go back to the public protection system. They would probably be separated and placed in different shelters." The possibility of seeing Isis, Janie and Pete separated and returned to the system that had failed them before made Ted feel a fury he hadn't experienced in years. "What can we do?" "First, get medical reports proving your mental sanity. Second, document even better your motivation to help the children. And third," Robert hesitated. "Third, what?" "Third, maybe it's time to tell the complete truth about Miriam, about why Isis is so important to you." "You think I should publicly expose my daughter's story?" "I think if we don't do it, you may lose the chance to save these children. And especially Isis." That night, Ted spent hours awake, thinking about Robert's proposal. Exposing Miriam's story would mean publicly admitting that he had failed as a father, that his daughter had preferred to live in misery rather than return home. It would mean destroying the image he had built for decades. But it would also mean giving Isis a chance to grow up in a family that loved her, away from the shelters and institutionalization that could completely destroy her ability to trust adults. The next morning, he made his decision. He called Robert and said only, "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow at 5 in the afternoon. I'm going to tell everything." It was a high-stakes gamble. If he lost, he would not only destroy his own reputation, but also lose any chance to protect Isis. But if he won, perhaps he could finally honor Miriam's memory in the way she deserved. The meeting room at Vasconcelos Marble had never hosted so many journalists. Representatives from the 3 local newspapers, the 2 main radio stations, and even a reporter from WCX-TV who had come from Burlington especially to cover the controversy involving businessman Theodore Vasconcelos. Robert had prepared everything carefully: microphones, chairs, even a company banner in the background to maintain an air of formality. Ted arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled time, wearing his best navy blue suit. He had spent the entire night rehearsing what he would say, but now, in front of the cameras and recorders, he felt his hands trembling slightly. Claire was sitting in the front row, a silent but supportive presence that he didn't expect to have. Good afternoon, he began, adjusting the microphone. I have called this interview to clarify the rumors that have been circulating about my involvement with 3 children in a situation of social vulnerability. The silence in the room was tense. Everyone knew that this would be a statement that would forever change the perception of Theodore Vasconcelos in Baru, Vermont. 2 months ago, I met a 6-year-old girl named Isis Santos. She was begging on Main Street, afraid of being punished with hot water if she didn't bring money home. Initially, my intention was only to help her sporadically. Marlene Cardoso, a reporter from the Bar Times Argus, raised her hand. Mr. Vasconcelos, why the specific interest in this child? Because she told me about a young woman who had taken care of her years ago. A young woman with curly hair, with a small scar on her chin, who taught the children to draw and read. A young woman she called Miriam. The name echoed through the room like a gunshot. Some journalists exchanged glances, realizing that they were about to hear something much deeper than they expected. Miriam was my daughter, Ted continued, his voice faltering slightly. 4 years ago, we had a terrible argument about her relationship with a guy I considered inadequate for our social position. In my arrogance and pride, I said unforgivable things. She left home that night and never came back. Claire closed, her eyes reliving the pain of that period. Some journalists lowered their eyes, realizing that they were witnessing a deeply intimate and painful moment. For 2 years, I hired detectives. I searched, but Miriam had simply disappeared. What I discovered through ISIS is that my daughter spent those 2 years living in a tenement in the back of the city, taking care of abandoned children. She chose to live in misery rather than return to a home where she had been rejected for love. John Batista Silva from WDEV Radio asked the question everyone wanted to ask. And what happened to your daughter? Ted took a deep breath. Miriam contracted a severe pulmonary disease due to the precarious conditions in which she lived. She passed away 2 years ago, alone, surrounded only by the children she had learned to love as a family. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the most experienced journalists seemed touched by the personal tragedy that was being revealed. When Isis showed me a ring that Miriam had given her, a ring that I myself had given to my daughter, at her graduation, I understood that it was no coincidence that I had found that girl. It was a final message from Miriam, a chance of redemption that she was offering me through a child she had loved. That's why you decided to take care of the 3 children? Marlene asked. Because they represent the last work that my daughter did in this world. Taking care of them is honoring her memory and perhaps redeeming myself from the terrible mistake I made as a father. Robert stood up to show documents. We have here all the proof that Mr. Vasconcelos has rigorously followed all the legal procedures. The children are under the supervision of a qualified social worker. They have medical and psychological care. They are enrolled in a suitable school. Mr. Vasconcelos, said Paul Mendez from WCX-TV, how do you respond to the accusations that you have developed a morbid obsession with children? I respond by showing this. Ted took the silver ring that Isis had given him out of his pocket. This ring belonged to my daughter. Isis kept it for 2 years as a reminder of the person who loved her most in this world. When a 6-year-old child entrusts you with something so precious, you understand that it's not obsession, it's responsibility. And your wife? Marlene asked. How does she see this situation? All eyes turned to Claire, who until then had remained silent. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling slightly. For 2 years, I lived with anger at my daughter, she said, her voice firm despite the emotion. I thought she had abandoned us out of ingratitude, discovering that she spent the last years of her life helping needy children while we simply pretended she didn't exist was the most painful blow I have ever received. She paused, wiping her eyes. But it was also an awakening. If my daughter dedicated her life to taking care of abandoned children, then supporting my husband in this mission is the only way I have to honor her memory. Claire's statement completely changed the tone of the interview. From an atmosphere of suspicion and accusation, the room turned into a session of understanding and empathy. "Mr. Vasconcelos," said John Batista, "what is your plan for the future of these children? Isis, Janie, and Pete will have all the opportunities I can offer: quality education, psychological support, unconditional love. And when they turn 18, if they want, they'll have a guaranteed job at my company. And what about the rumors about your mental health? I am available for any psychological evaluation that is necessary. I'm aware that my attitude may seem unusual, but I believe that acting out of love has never been a sign of insanity." When the interview ended, the journalists seemed genuinely touched by the story. Some approached Ted to congratulate him personally. Others made a point of shaking Claire's hand. "It was a brave decision," Marlene said to Robert. "It's not easy to expose your private life like that. Sometimes courage is the only way to protect those we love," the lawyer replied. That night, the articles began to be published. The Bara Times-Argus ran the headline, "Businessman Tells Personal Tragedy to Defend Orphaned Children." WDev Radio dedicated an entire hour of the evening program to discussing redemption and social responsibility. WCX-TV showed excerpts from the interview on the state news. But the most important reaction came the next day, when Ted went to visit the children. Isis ran to hug him as soon as he arrived. "Mr. Vasconcelos, Mrs. Carmen said that you talked about Miriam on television." "I did, yes. And you said that I was important to her?" "I said that you were one of the most important people in her life. And now people aren't going to talk bad about you anymore." "I don't know, Isis, but it doesn't matter anymore what people say." "Why?" "Because I learned something important. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that not everyone will understand or approve." That afternoon, something happened that not even Robert had foreseen. The company's phone rang non-stop, but it wasn't customers cancelling contracts. It was people offering help. A private school offered free scholarships for the 3 children. A pediatrician offered to follow them without charging. A family donated clothes and toys. Even Ted's competitors called to offer partnership in social projects. "It seems that your courage inspired other people," Robert commented. But the most emotional moment came 3 days later, when Isis gave Ted a new drawing. It was a big family: a man, a woman, 3 children, and in the sky, a female figure with curly hair looking at them with a smile. "Who is the lady in the sky?" Ted asked, although he already knew the answer. "It's Miriam. She's happy because she managed to bring us together. She always said that families are formed in the heart, not in the blood." Ted hugged Isis tightly, feeling that he had finally found the peace he had been looking for 2 years. Miriam had left her message through that extraordinary child, and he had finally learned to listen. But there was still one challenge left: to transform that temporary custody into a definitive adoption, and to ensure that nothing and no one could separate that family that love had built again. 3 weeks after the press conference, Ted's life had completely changed. The transparency about his personal history had brought an unexpected wave of support from the community, but it had also aroused the attention of people he preferred not to have known. One of them was Dr. Sandra Moreira, a psychologist specializing in adoption, who had been assigned by the court to assess the suitability of the Vasconcelos family to permanently care for the 3 children. Sandra was 45 years old, with grey hair always tied in a severe bun, and a reputation for being extremely rigorous in her evaluations. "Mr. Vasconcelos," she said during the first visit to the house where the children lived, "I need to be honest. Cases like yours are complicated. A single middle-aged man who develops a sudden attachment to vulnerable children always raises questions. "But I'm not single," Ted replied. "My wife is completely involved in the process." Your wife who, according to my information, initially vehemently opposed the situation. Ted realized that Sandra had done her homework. Claire had understandable fears, but when she understood the connection with our daughter, yes, the daughter who left after a family fight and about whom you never spoke publicly before. Sandra's tone was professional, but there was a coldness there that made Ted feel like a defendant being interrogated. She walked around the house, noting details on her tablet, asking seemingly casual questions that clearly had a specific purpose. "Do the children have separate rooms?" "Yes." "Have you established clear rules about privacy?" "Of course." "And does Carmen Santos stay here full-time?" "She does. And we also hired a second caregiver for the weekends." Sandra spoke individually with each child. Janie, always suspicious, answered with monosyllables. Pete barely spoke, but it was with Isis that she spent the most time, asking questions that left the girl visibly uncomfortable. "Isis, do you like living here?" "I like it a lot." "Does Mr. Vasconcelos treat you well?" "He does. He's very good to me." "Has he ever asked you to keep secrets?" The question caught Isis by surprise. "Secrets? Things that you do together that other people can't know?" "No, I don't understand." "Has he ever given you special gifts? Things that you can't tell other people about?" Isis was confused and scared. "He gave me crayons and drawing notebooks." Everyone knows that. Ted, who was watching the interview from afar, felt an anger growing in his chest. Sandra's questions clearly had malicious intentions, trying to make a 6-year-old child admit something that didn't exist. "Dr. Sandra," he interrupted, I know where you're going with these questions. Mr. Vasconcelos, I need to investigate all possibilities. Cases of older men who develop a fixation on specific children have worrying precedents." "Are you insinuating that—" "I'm not insinuating anything. I'm doing my job." But the damage was done. Isis had been clearly disturbed by the questions and spent the rest of the day quiet and withdrawn. At night, when Ted went to say goodbye, she held his hand tightly. "Mr. Vasconcelos, did I do something wrong?" "Of course not, my dear. Why do you ask that?" "Dr. Sandra asked strange questions. It seemed like I had done something bad." Ted knelt down to the girl's height. "Isis, listen carefully. You've never done anything wrong. Dr. Sandra just wants to make sure you're safe and happy." "She didn't seem to want to know if I was happy. She seemed to want me to say bad things about you." Isis's sharp perception surprised Ted. Even at 6 years old, she had perfectly understood the intentions behind Sandra's questions. "And what did you say?" "I told the truth, that you are the best person I know after Miriam." That night, Ted called Robert, deeply worried. "She's clearly trying to find something incriminating." "Ted, this is standard protocol. Forensic psychologists are trained to investigate even the most remote possibilities." "But she's scaring." "The children, especially Isis. Unfortunately, it's part of the process. We need to trust that the truth will prevail." But the situation worsened the following week when Sandra returned with a larger team, a social worker, a child psychiatrist, and an educator. This time they applied formal tests to all the children, observed family interactions, and took constant notes. It was during this second visit that something devastating happened. Isis was showing her drawings to the educator when she accidentally dropped the pencil case. When she bent down to pick up the pencils, Miriam's ring, which she always carried on a chain around her neck, hidden under her blouse, slipped out. "What a pretty ring," commented the educator. "Who gave it to you?" Isis got nervous. It's mine," But it's too expensive for a girl your age to have. Who bought it for you? No one bought it. I already had it. Sandra approached, clearly interested. Isis, where did that ring come from? I... You can tell me. There won't be a problem. Miriam gave it to me, Isis whispered finally, before she left. And who is Miriam? She was a girl who took care of us in the old place. Sandra took the ring delicately and examined the internal engraving. She read aloud, "To my princess, with love, Dad." The silence in the room was tense. Sandra looked directly at Ted. "Mr. Vasconcelos, did this ring belong to your daughter?" "It did." "And how did it end up with Isis?" "Miriam gave it to her, before she left." "And when did you find out about this?" "On the day I met Isis. That's when she showed me the ring that I understood the connection." Sandra took notes frantically. "So you knew from the first day that this child had had contact with your daughter?" "I knew." "And didn't you find it strange? Didn't you consider the possibility that this would influence your judgment?" "I considered that it was an opportunity to honor my daughter's memory, or a way to replace her with a younger and more controllable version." The accusation was like a slap in Ted's face. "How dare you insinuate such a thing?" "Mr. Vasconcelos, it's my obligation to consider all psychological possibilities. A father who loses a young daughter and then develops a fixation on a child who knew that daughter. Well, there are clinical precedents for this type of emotional transfer." Isis, who had listened to the entire conversation without fully understanding it, began to cry. "I don't want them to take the ring. Miriam said it was important." "No one is going to take your ring," Ted said, picking the girl up in his arms. "This ring is yours. Miriam wanted it to be yours." But Sandra was relentless. "Mr. Vasconcelos, I'm going to recommend a complete psychiatric evaluation before we proceed with the adoption process." "Based on what?" "Based on potentially transferential behavior, fixation on substitutes, and use of a vulnerable child to satisfy unresolved emotional needs." Robert, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "Dr. Sandra, these are speculations without factual basis. They are possibilities that need to be investigated. This case is suspended until further order." When the team left, Ted sat down heavily in the house's living room. Isis approached him, still holding the ring. "Mr. Vasconcelos, what does suspended mean?" "It means they may separate us for a while." "Forever?" "I don't know, my dear. I don't know." That night, Isis woke up crying in the middle of the night. Carmen found her in the yard, looking at the stars. "What are you doing here, honey?" "Talking to Miriam. I asked her why people don't understand that Mr. Vasconcelos is good." "And what do you think she would answer?" "I think she would say that sometimes people are afraid of what they don't know, and that we have to be strong and wait." Carmen hugged the girl, impressed with her maturity. "You're very wise for only being 6 years old. Miriam taught me that when we really love someone, we never give up, even when it seems like everything is lost." But while Isis looked to the stars for guidance from Miriam, Ted was in his office, talking to Robert about the real possibility of losing the children to the public protection system. And for the first time since he had met Isis, he began to doubt whether his fight was worth it. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for a rainy Monday in October. Dr. Fernando August, the psychiatrist assigned by the court, had a private clinic in downtown Burlington and a reputation for being meticulous in his analyses. Ted arrived at the office accompanied by Robert, prepared for the most important session of his life. Dr. Fernando was a tall, thin man with gold-rimmed glasses and a well-groomed grey beard. His room was filled with diplomas and certificates that attested to decades of experience in forensic psychiatry. Mr. Vasconcelos, I'm going to be direct, he began, flipping through a thick folder. I've read Dr. Sandra's entire report, and I need to better understand your motivations for taking responsibility for these 3 children. Doctor, I've explained several times, yes, the connection with your daughter, but I want you to tell me about your emotional state in the 2 years after Miriam's disappearance. For 2 hours, Dr. Fernando led Ted through a detailed analysis of his grief, his guilt, his relationship with Claire, his sleep patterns, his ability to concentrate at work. They were clinical but penetrating questions. When you met Isis for the first time, what did you feel? Compassion. Then when she mentioned Miriam, I felt it was an opportunity for redemption. Redemption or replacement? Redemption. Isis is not my daughter, nor have I ever tried to make her one. She is a child who deserves love and care, but a child who represents your last connection with Miriam. Yes, and doesn't that influence your judgment about what is best for her? Ted thought carefully before answering. Doctor, I may be motivated by the memory of my daughter, but that doesn't mean that my decisions about Isis are harmful to her. On the contrary, because I know what it's like to lose a daughter, I would never do something that could hurt Isis. Dr. Fernando administered a battery of psychological tests, had Ted draw figures, interpret blots, answer hundreds of questions about his thoughts and feelings. The process lasted 4 hours. I'll need a week to analyze the results, he said. At the end, I also want to talk to your wife and observe your interaction with the children. Meanwhile, in the house where the children lived, the tension was affecting everyone. Janie had returned to being aggressive and distrustful. Pete hardly spoke, and Isis spent hours drawing obsessively, creating increasingly somber images. She's regressing, Carmen told Claire during a phone conversation. The uncertainty is destroying the security she had achieved. What can we do? Honestly, hope that Dr. August is more sensible than Dr. Moreira. On Wednesday, Dr. August visited the house. This time, instead of interrogating the children, he simply observed. He sat in a chair in the corner of the room while family life went on as normal. He saw how Isis automatically turned to Ted when she hurt herself playing in the yard. How Janie, despite her distrust, asked his opinion about her homework. How Pete timidly showed him a drawing he had made. Mr. Vasconcelos, Isis said during lunch, can I ask you something? Of course, my dear. If the doctor decides that we can't stay together, will you forget about us? The question made Ted's heart clench. Isis, I would never forget about you. You are my family now. Even if they take us to different places. Even then, and I'll fight until the last day to make sure that doesn't happen. Dr. August observed how Ted hugged Isis, how his tears were genuine, how the affection between them was natural and spontaneous. There was nothing forced or artificial in that interaction. On Friday, the result came that would change everything. Robert called Ted with a tense voice. You need to come to my office now. Dr. August wants to talk to us. Ted arrived at the office in 15 minutes, his heart beating erratically. Dr. August was sitting at the meeting table, his expression unreadable. Mr. Vasconcelos, after complete analysis, I can state that there is no indication of psychiatric disorder, pathological transfer, or any condition that prevents you from adequately caring for the children. The relief was so intense that Ted had to lean on the table. Doctor, more than that, Dr. August continued, your motivation, although complex, is psychologically healthy. You are not trying to replace your daughter. You are honoring her. Memory through acts of genuine love. And Dr. Moreira's report? Dr. Moreira is a competent professional, but her suspicions were not confirmed. On the contrary, I observed a functional family with healthy emotional bonds and adequate care for the children's needs. Robert smiled for the first time in weeks. Does this mean that the adoption process can proceed? It means that I strongly Recommend that it proceed. These children have found stability and love. Separating them now would be traumatic and unnecessary. That afternoon, Ted ran to the children's house with the best news he could give. He found the three in the yard, playing timidly under Carmen's watchful eye. "I have some important news for you," he announced. "Good or bad?" Janie asked, always practical. "Very good. The doctor said we can stay together forever." Isis dropped the toy she was holding and ran to hug him. "Forever, really? Forever, really? And no one can change that?" "No one." Pete, who rarely showed emotions, began to cry. "Mr. Vasconcelos, does that mean we are a real family now?" "It means exactly that." Janie, trying to maintain her tough girl, compose, wiped her eyes discreetly. "And are we going to live in a bigger house? If you want. In fact, Claire and I were thinking about a house with a pool and a big yard." "With birds?" Isis asked. "With lots of birds." That night, Isis made a special drawing. It was the whole family, Ted, Claire, her, Janie, and Pete, in a large house, with a garden full of flowers. And in the sky, Miriam smiled, blessing the family that had been formed through her love. "Mr. Vasconcelos," she said, handing him the drawing, "I think Miriam is happy now." "Why?" "Because she managed to do what she always wanted, bring together people who needed love." A week later, the adoption papers were finally signed. In the registry office, with Robert by his side and Claire holding his hand, Ted formalized what had already been reality in their hearts for months. Isis Santos Vasconcelos, Janie Silva Vasconcelos, Pedro Moreira Vasconcelos, read the registry officer. "From this date, you are legally the children of Theodore and Claire Vasconcelos." The three children signed their new names with special care. Isis took a long time to sign, concentrating as if it were the most important thing she had ever done in her life. "Ready," she said when she finished. "Now no one can separate us ever again." But it was Pete who made the most touching observation. "Mr. Vasconcelos, Dad, thank you for not giving up on us." "Thank you for letting me be your dad," Ted replied, hugging the three children that destiny had given him through Miriam's memory. That night, in the new house they had bought, a large house with a flower garden and a small pool, Ted found Isis on the porch, looking at the stars. "What are you doing, my daughter?" "Telling Miriam about our first day as an official family. I think she's proud." "I'm sure she is." "Dad," Isis said, using the word for the first time, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "The day I met you on the street, Miriam had told me in a dream that a good man was going to show up to take care of us. I think she knew it was you." Ted hugged his youngest daughter, feeling that he had finally found the peace he had been looking for 4 years. Miriam had left, but her love continued alive through that impossible family that had been born of forgiveness and redemption. And when he looked at the stars that night, Ted could swear that one of them winked especially at him, as if his daughter was finally at peace, knowing that she had fulfilled her last mission on Earth. 6 months had passed since the official adoption, and life in the Vasconcelos house had found a sweet and stable rhythm. The children were completely adapted to their new reality. Janie excelled at school with excellent grades. Pete had discovered a special talent for math. And Isis continued to fill entire notebooks with her colorful drawings of birds and happy families. But it was on a sunny morning in April that something happened that would forever change Ted's understanding of that whole story. Isis was in the yard, feeding the mockingbirds that had become regular visitors, when an unknown woman appeared at the gate. "Excuse me," said the woman, a lady of approximately 65 years old, grey hair and kind eyes. "I'm looking for the Vasconcelos family." Ted was watering the rose bushes when he heard the voice. He approached the gate, intrigued. I am Theodore Vasconcelos. How can I help you? My name is Josephine Andrade. I believe you take care of a girl named Isis. Ted's heart skipped a beat. Yes, Isis is my daughter. Why? Because I knew that girl a few years ago, and I also knew someone very special to her, and to you. Isis, who had heard her name being mentioned, approached curiously. When she saw Mrs. Andrade, her eyes widened with surprise and joy. Mrs. Andrade, you're Mrs. Andrade. The lady smiled tenderly. My dear Isis, how you've grown. You look beautiful and healthy. Do you know who she is? Isis asked Ted, holding Mrs. Andrade's hand through the gate. It's Mrs. Andrade who took care of us before Vinny. She knew Miriam. Ted felt his legs go weak. This was the woman Robert had mentioned in his investigations, the coordinator of the informal shelter where Miriam had spent her last years. Please, come in, he said, opening the gate. I would very much like to talk to you. Mrs. Andrade entered and was immediately hugged by Isis, with an effusiveness that showed the genuine affection she felt for the lady. Mrs. Andrade, look at my house. Look how pretty it is, and I have a family now. I see that, my dear. I'm very happy for you. Ted led them to the porch, where Claire joined them after the introductions. Mrs. Andrade observed the environment with evident approval. Isis has found a wonderful family, she commented. Miriam would be very happy to know that. Did you know my daughter well? Ted asked, his voice choked with emotion. I knew her very well. Miriam lived with me for almost 2 years. She was like a daughter to me. Mrs. Andrade paused, observing Ted's face carefully. But there are things about her that perhaps you don't know. What kind of things? Things that she asked me to tell you if I ever found you. The silence that followed was tense. Claire held Ted's hand, realizing that they were about to discover something important. Miriam talked about you every day, Mrs. Andrade continued. She told me about the fight, about the harsh words that were said on both sides, but she also told me about the love you had for each other. She said that. She said it many times, especially in the last months when she was weaker. She told me that you had been a wonderful father throughout her childhood, that you had given her everything you could give. The fight was just a bad moment in a very long love story. Tears streamed down Ted's face. So why didn't she ever come home? Because she was afraid. Afraid of what? Mrs. Andrade looked at Isis, who was playing in the yard, before answering. Afraid that you wouldn't forgive her. Afraid that she had lost her father's love forever. That's impossible. I never stopped loving her. I know that. And deep down she also knew. But wounded pride and fear are powerful feelings. They kept her away from home for 2 years. Claire spoke for the first time. Did she talk about me? She did, yes. She said she had 2 mothers. Me, who took care of her in the present, and you, who had taken care of her whole life. She missed you very much, too. Why did you come to look for us now? Ted asked. Because I heard through acquaintances that you had adopted Isis and the other children, and because before leaving this world, Miriam gave me some things to give to you if I ever found you. Mrs. Andrade opened the fabric bag she was carrying and took out an envelope yellowed with time. She wrote this in the last days of her life. She asked me to keep it and deliver it personally if I had the opportunity. With trembling hands, Ted took the envelope. On the outside was written in Miriam's familiar handwriting, "For Dad, with all my love, Miriam." May I? Of course, it's yours. Ted opened the envelope carefully. Inside there were 2 sheets of paper with Miriam's handwriting, a little shaky but still legible. My dear Dad, if you are reading this, it means that Mrs. Andrade managed to find you and deliver this letter. It also means that I have already left this world, but I hope that I have not left your heart. I want you to know that every day I spent away from home, I thought about you and Mom. Not a day went by without me regretting the harsh words we exchanged on that terrible night. But pride and fear kept me from returning. I know that you thought that Brian wasn't good for me. Maybe you were right. He abandoned me in the first few months when he realized that I wouldn't return home in search of comfort. But that experience taught me something valuable. The true love is the one that doesn't waver in storms. I have spent these 2 years taking care of children who, like me, had been lost from their families. Through them, I learned that family is not just blood, it's choice, it's care, it's unconditional love. Taking care of these children made me better understand the love that you and Mom have always had for me. Among all the children I have met, Isis is special. She reminds me a lot of myself as a child, curious, dreamy, full of love to give. I took care of her as if she were my little sister, and she gave me purpose when I needed it most. Dad, if destiny ever brings Isis close to you, take care of her. She will need a family that loves her unconditionally, that believes in her dreams, that helps her fly high like the bird she likes to draw so much. And when that happens, know that it's not a coincidence. It's my way of asking forgiveness for the years I wasted away from you. It's my way of saying that the love between father and daughter is stronger than any fight, more lasting than any wounded pride. I love you, Dad. I have always loved you, even when I was angry. Forgive your stubborn daughter who took too long to come home. With all my eternal love, Miriam. P.S. Isis has a ring that belonged to me. It's the ring that you gave me at graduation. When she gives this ring to you, know that it's my way of saying that our family is complete again. Ted finished reading the letter with his face bathed in tears. Claire cried silently at his side, and even Mrs. Andrade had moist eyes. She knew, Ted murmured. She knew I would find Isis. Miriam was always special, Mrs. Andrade said. She had an intuition about the future that impressed me. In the last days, she constantly repeated that Isis would find a wonderful family, that everything would be all right. Isis, who had approached during the reading of the letter, touched Ted's arm gently. Dad, why are you crying? Because I just received a very special letter from Miriam. She wrote a letter to you. She did. And in this letter, she asked me to take very good care of you. She knew we were going to meet? It seems she knew, yes. Isis smiled, that radiant smile that illuminated any environment. I always knew. She had arranged everything. Miriam was very smart. That afternoon, Mrs. Andrade told stories about the 2 years that Miriam had spent at the shelter. She talked about how she taught the children to read, how she comforted those who cried from longing, how she shared her food even when there was little for everyone. She became an even better person after she left home, Mrs. Andrade said. The pain made her grow, made her more compassionate and loving. When night fell and Mrs. Andrade prepared to leave, Isis ran to her room and returned with a new drawing. It was Miriam in the sky, smiling and blessing a large family gathered in a beautiful house. It's for you to take, Isis said. For you. To remember that Miriam is happy where she is. Mrs. Andrade hugged Isis affectionately. Thank you, my dear. I will keep this drawing forever. That night, after the children fell asleep, Ted and Claire stayed on the porch talking about Mrs. Andrade's visit and Miriam's letter. Now I understand why you felt so connected to Isis from the first moment, Claire said. Miriam really planned everything. It wasn't a coincidence, Ted agreed. It was destiny. It was love that transcends life. Do you think she's at peace now? I'm sure. Our family's complete, and that's all she wanted. That night, Ted slept peacefully for the first time in 4 years, holding Miriam's letter against his chest and knowing that the love of a daughter had guided his steps back to happiness. 2 years had passed since Mrs. Andrade's visit, and Life in the Vasconcelos house had turned into a symphony of everyday joy. Isis, now 8 years old, had become a confident and radiant girl. Her grades at school were excellent, and her drawings adorned all the walls of the house. Janie, at 10 years old, showed an impressive maturity and dreamed of being a doctor. Pete, at 12 years old, had discovered a passion for engineering and spent hours creating projects with building blocks. Claire had transformed completely. The bitter and closed-off woman of the first months had given way to a loving and dedicated mother who actively participated in the children's school life and organized memorable birthday parties. It was as if taking care of the 3 adopted children had awakened in her a motherhood that she didn't even know still existed. Ted's company also thrived as never before. Paradoxically, his transparency about his personal life had attracted new clients who admired his courage and integrity. Vasconcelos Marble had become not only a successful company, but also an example of social responsibility in the region. But it was on a December afternoon, on the eve of the 3rd anniversary of the meeting between Ted and Isis, that the discovery that would definitively close the circle of this extraordinary story took place. Isis was organizing her old drawings in a special box that Ted had bought for her when she found a crumpled piece of paper that had escaped her previous cleanings. It was a drawing she had made while still in the tenement. In the last days, she spent with Vinny. "Dad," she called, "I found a very old drawing from the bad time." Ted approached, curious. The drawing was different from the others, darker, made with dark pencil, showing a child alone in a small house. But there was something written on the back, in a handwriting that he didn't recognize. "Isis, who wrote this on the back?" "I don't know. I've never seen it before." Ted turned the paper and read what was written. "For Miriam's father, when you find this child, know that she carries the last gift that your daughter left for the world, Raquel Fonseca." The name hit him like lightning. Raquel Fonseca. Ted vaguely remembered that name. A nurse who had worked at the health center in downtown Barra years ago. "Isis, do you remember someone named Raquel?" Raquel. Isis frowned, concentrating. "Ah, the lady at the health center. She's the one who took us when we got sick. Did she know Miriam?" "She did. They talked a lot. Raquel always asked about Miriam when we went there." Ted felt that there was one more piece of the puzzle to discover. The next day, he searched for information about Raquel Fonseca and discovered that she now worked at the regional hospital in Barra. When he found her, Raquel was a woman of about 40 years old, brown hair tied in a practical ponytail, with that efficient and caring air typical of experienced nurses. She was finishing her shift when Ted introduced himself. "Mr. Theodore Vasconcelos, I know who you are. I read about your story in the newspapers." "Nurse Raquel, I found an old note with your name. I believe you knew my daughter Miriam." Raquel's face lit up with a nostalgic smile. "Miriam, of course, I knew her. What a special girl your daughter was. Can you tell me what you know about her?" "I can, yes, but it's a long story. Do you want to have a coffee?" They went to the hospital cafeteria, where Raquel told details that Ted had never heard before. Miriam came to the health center regularly, always accompanied by different children. At first, I thought she was a single mother with several children, but then I realized that she was taking care of abandoned children. How was she in those last months? Visibly ill, but refusing to get proper treatment. She was afraid of being hospitalized because there would be no one to take care of the children. And Isis? Ah, Isis was special to her. Miriam always said that that girl was like a little sister she never had. She took care of her with a different kind of affection. Raquel paused as if deciding whether she should continue. "Nurse, is there something else you want to tell me?" "There is, yes. Something that Miriam asked me to do, but that I hadn't been able to do until now." "What?" In the last days of her life, Miriam was very worried about Isis's future. She asked me to write letters, several letters to several important people in Bara, businessmen, doctors, influential people, all with the same request. If one day a 6-year-old girl named Isis Santos crossed their path, that they should take care of her as if she were their daughter. Ted was speechless. Miriam wrote letters to other people? She wrote to 15 different people. Your letter was the first on the list. My letter? The letter addressed to you, Theodore Vasconcelos, businessman and father of Miriam. She spent hours writing, rewriting, until it was perfect. But I never received any letter, because when I went to deliver it, your secretary said that you didn't receive personal correspondence from strangers. The letter came back to me. Ted felt a mixture of shock and regret. Do you still have that letter? I do. I've kept it all these years, waiting for an opportunity to deliver it personally. Raquel opened her bag and took out a sealed envelope, yellowed with time. On the front was written in Miriam's handwriting, "To my father, Theodore Vasconcelos, please take care of Isis as you took care of me." Miriam planned everything from the beginning, Ted murmured. She knew I would find Isis because she herself was arranging for that to happen. Your daughter was an extraordinary person, Mr. Vasconcelos. Even dying, she thought about how to protect the children she loved. Ted opened the letter with trembling hands. It was shorter than the previous one, but equally emotional. My dear Dad, if you are reading this, it means that all my other letters have reached you and that you have managed to find Isis. It means that my plan worked and that our family is reunited again. This is my last letter, Dad. The most important of all, because in this one I want to tell you the complete truth about why I never came home. It wasn't just pride, Dad. It wasn't just resentment for the fight. During the first months after I left home, I wanted to go back every day. I walked to our street several times. I stood looking at our house from afar, gathering courage to ring the doorbell. But I always gave up at the last hour because I had discovered something about myself that changed everything. I had discovered my purpose in life. Taking care of those abandoned children wasn't just a way to survive, Dad. It was my vocation. For the first time in my life, I felt that I was doing something really important, something that made me happy in a way I had never experienced. And then I realized that if I returned home to comfort and safety, I might lose that discovery about who I really was. Maybe I would go back to being just the spoiled daughter of a rich businessman without a real purpose in life. So I made the most difficult decision of my life. I chose to stay with the children, not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you so much that I wanted to become a person worthy of that love. Dad, I know that I left this world very young, but I left happy because I managed to fulfill my mission to take care of Isis until she found a family that truly loved her, and that family I always knew would be you. Now I can rest in peace, knowing that the love between us never died. It just transformed into something bigger, a beautiful family that was born from our love and that will perpetuate our story forever. Love Isis as you loved me, Dad. She is my final gift to you, your daughter who loves you infinitely, Miriam P.S. Inside the ring I gave to Isis, there is a small photo of us from my 15th birthday. It's so she always remembers that she has been part of our family forever. Ted finished reading the letter with tears running down Raquel's face as well. Now I understand why you met, she said. It wasn't destiny, it was love. It was Miriam moving heaven and earth to take care of the people she loved. That night, Ted gathered the whole family in the living room to tell them about his conversation with Raquel and to show them Miriam's second letter. The children listened in silence, absorbing the dimension of the love that had made their family possible. So Miriam wrote letters to several people, Janie asked. She wrote, but she knew that I would be the only one who would really take care of you. How did she know? Pete asked. Because she knew me better than I knew myself, Ted replied. Isis, who had listened to everything with special attention, stood up and hugged Ted. Dad, now I understand why I've always felt safe with you from the first day. It's because Miriam was taking care of everything. Exactly, my daughter. And now our story is complete. Ted looked around the room, at Claire, who smiled tenderly, at Janie and Pete, who had become his children of the heart, at Isis, who had been Miriam's final gift, at the house full of love and laughter that they had built together. Now our story is complete, he confirmed, and it's a love story that will last forever. That night, Isis made her last drawing about Miriam. It was the whole family gathered at a large dining table, with Miriam sitting. In the place of honor, smiling and blessing the meal. At the bottom of the drawing, she wrote in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Thank you, Miriam, for giving me the most beautiful family in the world." And that's how the story that began with the cry of a desperate child on a street in Bara ended with the laughter of a happy family, united forever by the eternal love of a daughter who knew how to transform her own pain into the happiness of the people she loved most. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can leave for the world is not what we take with us, but the love we manage to plant in the hearts of others. And Miriam's love had planted an entire family, blossomed in 3, saved children, and borne fruit in a redemption that would forever heal the wounds of a father who learned that it is never too late to love unconditionally. 5 years had passed since that first meeting on Main Street, and the month of March brought with it a special date that the Vasconcelos family would celebrate for the first time in an official way. Family Day, as Isis had named the date on which Ted met her for the first time. Isis, now 11 years old, had become an eloquent and determined girl with big dreams of becoming a psychologist to help other children who went through difficulties. Her drawings had evolved tremendously, and she had won several school art contests. Janie, at 13 years old, maintained her exemplary grades and was already talking seriously about pursuing medicine. Pete, at 15 years old, had developed a passion for architecture and spent hours designing houses that, according to him, would be perfect homes for families like ours. The Vasconcelos house had become a point of reference in the community. Ted and Claire had created a foundation in Miriam's name, which helped children in situations of vulnerability, always following the example that their daughter had left. But it was on a Monday morning, when Ted arrived at the office, that he received a call that transported him back to the darkest days of his story. "Mr. Vasconcelos? This is Dr. Marcus Silva, Director of the State Penitentiary of Burlington." "Yes, Doctor. I have an inmate here who is requesting a conversation with you. Says he has important information about your family." "What inmate?" "Vinny Rebus. He is serving time for child exploitation and attempted extortion." Vinny's name made Ted's blood run cold. The man who had exploited Isis and tried to blackmail his family had been imprisoned for 4 years, and Ted had managed to completely forget his existence. "What does he want?" "I can't give details over the phone, but he insists that he has something important to tell about your daughter Miriam." Ted was silent for a long moment. The last thing he wanted was to relive those painful moments, especially now that his life had found peace and harmony. "Mr. Vasconcelos? I'm here. Doctor, I have no interest in talking to that man." "I understand perfectly, but he is very insistent, says that if he doesn't talk to you, he will die with important information on his conscience." "What kind of information?" "About the last days of your daughter, and about something that she would have left specifically for you." Curiosity and pain mixed in Ted's chest. Part of him wanted to hang up the phone and never think about Vinny again. But the part that still carried unanswered questions about Miriam made him hesitate. Can I think about it? Of course, but Mr. Vasconcelos, I must warn you that Vinny is having health problems. If you want to talk to him, you can't take too long. That night, Ted told Claire about the call. They talked at length about the pros and cons of meeting Vinny. Ted, you have already discovered everything you needed to know about Miriam, Claire said. Why open old wounds? Because what if there really is something important, something she wanted me to know? And what if it's just another attempt at manipulation? Then I'll leave, but if there is a last message from her, you won't be able to rest until you find out, will you? No, I won't. 3 days later, Ted was sitting in a cold room at the state penitentiary, waiting for Vinny. When the man appeared, Ted was shocked by his appearance. Vinny had aged decades in 5 years. He was too thin, pale, with the look of someone carrying serious illnesses. Mr. Vasconcelos, Vinny said in a hoarse voice, thank you for coming. Get straight to the point, Vinny. What do you have to tell me? First, I want to apologize for what I did to the children, for the blackmail, for everything. I didn't come here for that. I know, but I needed to say it. Vinny coughed heavily before continuing. Mr. Vasconcelos, in the last months that Miriam was with us, she wasn't just sick, she was preparing things. What kind of things? She wrote letters, organized papers, made lists. She said she needed to leave everything right for when she departed. I already know that. But there is one thing that no one knows. Something that she asked me to keep and only deliver if I met you personally. Ted leaned forward. What? Vinny took out of his shirt pocket a small sealed envelope, yellowed and with worn corners. She gave me this 3 days before she left. She said that if I ever met her father, I should deliver it personally. Ted took the envelope with trembling hands. On the front was written, "To Dad, the final truth about my love for you, Miriam." Vinny, why did you keep this all these years? Because even being a bad man, Mr. Vasconcelos, some promises are sacred, and the promise I made to your daughter in the last moments of her life was one of those. Ted looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of his daughter's last words. What's in this envelope? I don't know. I never opened it. Miriam made me swear that only you could open it. Ted looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of his daughter's last words. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Yes. I want you to know that Miriam talked about you every day, even in the worst moments, even when she was in pain. She always told stories about the wonderful father she had. She made me understand that that fight was just a bad moment in a very big love story. Why are you telling me this? Because seeing how you took care of the children, I understood that Miriam was right about you. And because I want you to know that your daughter left this world with love in her heart, not with anger. Ted stood up, carefully putting the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. Vinny, thank you for keeping this. Mr. Vasconcelos, are the children okay? They're great, they're my children now. Does Isis still draw? She does, and she's very talented. Miriam used to say that she would be special. I think she was right. When Ted left the penitentiary, he drove to a public park and sat on an isolated bench. With his heart beating fast, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with Miriam's handwriting. My dear Dad, if you are reading this, it means that all my other letters have reached you and that you have managed to find Isis. It means that my plan worked and that our family is reunited again. This is my last letter, Dad, the most important of all, because in this one I want to tell you the complete truth about why I never came home. It wasn't just pride, Dad. It wasn't just resentment for the fight. During the first months after I left home, I wanted to come back every day. I walked to our street several times. I stood looking at our house from afar, gathering courage to ring the doorbell. But I always gave up at the last hour. Because I had discovered something about myself that changed everything. I had discovered my purpose in life. Taking care of those abandoned children wasn't just a way to survive, Dad. It was my vocation. For the first time in my life, I felt that I was doing something really important, something that made me happy in a way I had never experienced. And then I realized that if I returned home, to comfort and safety, I might lose that discovery about who I really was. Maybe I would go back to being just the spoiled daughter of a rich businessman without a real purpose in life. So I made the most difficult decision of my life. I chose to stay with the children. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you so much that I wanted to become a person worthy of that love. Dad, I know that I left this world very young, but I left happy because I managed to fulfill my mission, to take care of Isis until she found a family that truly loved her. And that family I always knew would be you. Now I can rest in peace, knowing that the love between us never died. It just transformed into something bigger, a beautiful family that was born from our love and that will perpetuate our story forever. Love Isis as you loved me, Dad. She is my final gift to you. Your daughter who loves you infinitely, Miriam. Ted finished reading the letter with tears streaming down his face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of complete peace. He finally understood Miriam's entire journey, all the wisdom behind her choices. That night, he gathered the whole family in the living room and read Miriam's last letter to everyone. When he finished, Isis ran to get the ring that she always wore on her neck. Carefully, she opened the small secret compartment that she had never noticed and took out a tiny photo. Miriam, at 15, smiling radiantly next to Ted at a birthday party. She really planned everything, murmured Claire. Moved. From the first day, Ted agreed, and now finally our story is truly complete. Isis held the photo carefully, observing Miriam's young and happy face. Dad, can I ask a question? Of course, my daughter. Did Miriam get what she wanted? Did she manage to make us happy? Ted looked around the room, at his family, reunited, at the house full of love and laughter, at the full life they had built together. She did, Isis. She achieved much more than she could have dreamed of. And that night, for the first time in years, Ted slept without any unanswered questions about Miriam. His daughter had completed her earthly mission in a perfect way, and her love would continue alive forever through the family she had created with her own hands. 3 months after the revelation of Miriam's last letter, life in the Vasconcelos family had reached a deep serenity. The discovery of the complete truth about Miriam's motivations had brought a peace that everyone felt, as if the last piece of a complex puzzle had finally found its place. But it was on a June afternoon, when Isis returned from school with a worried expression on her face, that a new situation presented itself, not a crisis, but a challenge that would test the strength of the family ties they had built. Dad, said Isis, entering the room where Ted was reading company reports, can I talk to you about something important? Of course, my daughter. What happened? Isis sat down in the armchair in front of him with the seriousness of someone much older than her 11 years. Today at school, the teacher asked us to make a family tree, and I got confused. Confused how? Well, I know that you and Mom Claire are my parents now, and I know that Miriam was my sister of the heart. But what about my blood parents? Did I have parents before I went to the tenement? The question caught Ted off guard. During all these years, Isis had never shown curiosity about her biological origin. She seemed completely satisfied with the family she had gained, never questioning where she had come from. Isis, why are you thinking about this now? Because some kids at school said that I can't make a real family tree because I'm adopted. They said that I don't have a real family. Ted felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. the same anger he felt whenever someone questioned the legitimacy of his family. "And what did you answer?" "I said they were wrong, that I have the most beautiful family in the world. But then I started thinking, did I have other parents before? Are they looking for me?" "Isis, would you like to know about your biological family?" The girl was silent for a long moment, processing the question. "I don't know. Sometimes I'm curious, but I'm also scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of finding out that they didn't want me. Or worse, scared of finding out that they want me back now." Isis's brutal honesty touched Ted deeply. "My daughter, nothing that we discover about your past will change what we are today. You are my daughter, our daughter, forever. Even if other parents show up. Even then. Family isn't just blood, Isis. It's love, it's care, it's choice. And we chose you as much as you chose us." That night, Ted talked to Claire about his conversation with Isis. Robert was called to advise them on how to proceed if they decided to investigate the girl's origins. "It's natural for her to be curious," Robert said. "Many adopted children go through this phase. The question is, are you prepared for what you may discover?" "What kind of thing?" Claire asked. "You may discover that the biological parents really couldn't afford to raise her. Or you may discover that there is biological family looking for her. Or you may not discover anything. Many abandoned children leave no traces. And Isis? Is she prepared? That's the most important question. She needs to understand that knowing her origins doesn't change her current identity. She will always be Isis Vasconcelos, your daughter." 3 days later, Robert brought surprising news. "I got information about Isis through the records of the old shelter where she was before she went to the tenement. And then she was found, abandoned in a church when she was 2 years old. Along with her, there was only a note saying, 'Take good care of my Isis, her mother who loves her very much.'" "Just that?" "Just that. There were no documents, there were no clues about the family. She was registered as Isis Santos because she was found in the Church of the Saints." "You mean she really has no known biological family?" "Apparently not, but there is one interesting thing in the shelter's records." "What?" "A young woman of approximately 18 years old visited Isis regularly during the first months. She always said that she was the girl's cousin, but she never formally identified herself." Ted and Claire exchanged glances. "You think that?" "I think it may have been Miriam. The age matches, the period too, and it would explain how Isis arrived at the same tenement where Miriam was. Miriam may have been responsible for taking Isis out of the shelter. It's possible. Maybe she felt responsible for the girl from the beginning." When they told Isis about the discovery, she received the news with surprising maturity. "So my birth mother left me at the church because she loved me." "It seems so," Theodore replied. "She wanted you to have a better life than she could offer. And Miriam found me at the shelter." "Probably. And she looked after you since you were little." Isis was thoughtful for a moment. "So Miriam has always been my big sister from before I can even remember." "It seems so. And you're my parents because she planned it that way." "Exactly." Isis smiled, that radiant smile that lit up any room. "Then our family is even more special than I thought. It was built with so much love from so many different people." "How so?" "My birth mother loved me enough to leave me where I would be safe. Miriam loved me enough to take care of me and bring me to you, and you loved me enough to make me a real daughter." The wisdom of the 11-year-old impressed all the adults present. "So now, Isis, what are you going to do about your family tree?" "I'm going to make 2, she replied promptly. "One with our current family, which is the most important, and another with all the people who loved me before I got here. My birth mother who left me at the church, Miriam who took care of me, Mrs. Josephina, even Nurse Raquel, And if the kids at school say it's not valid, I'll tell them they don't understand anything about family. Real family is made of love, not paper. A week later, Isis presented her project at school. She had created 2 beautifully drawn family trees. The first showed the Vasconcelos family: Ted, Claire herself, Janie and Pete. The second showed all the people who had contributed to her journey to get to the first family. The teacher was so impressed with the creativity and emotional depth of the project that she asked Isis to present it to the entire school during the next parent-teacher meeting. "Family," said Isis before an audience of children and adults, "isn't just who gave us life. It's who chose to give our life meaning. It's who stayed when things got tough. It's who loves us for our flaws and helps us become better people." Isis's presentation became legendary at the school. Several adoptive families approached the Vasconcelos afterwards, wanting advice on how to deal with their children's identity issues. That night, Ted found Isis in the backyard, watching the stars as she always did when she wanted to talk to. "Miriam, what are you telling her today?" "I'm telling her that I finally understand why she brought me to you," Isis replied. "It wasn't just so I could have a family. It was so I could learn that true love has no limitations, no conditions." "How so?" "Miriam taught me that we can love many people at the same time. I can love my birth mother, who left me at the church even without knowing her. I can love Miriam, who took care of me. And I can love you, who are my real parents. I don't have to choose just one love." Ted hugged his daughter, marveling at her ability to transform every experience into wisdom. "You are a very special girl, Isis." "I'm lucky," she corrected. "Lucky to have had so much love in my life. Not everyone has that." "And what are you going to do with all that luck?" "I'm going to do like Miriam. I'm going to pass it on. When I grow up, I want to help other children find their real families." At that moment, looking at the 11-year-old girl who had become his daughter, Ted understood that Miriam had accomplished something even more extraordinary than he had imagined. She had not only saved Isis, she had created a new generation of people capable of loving without limits, of building families based on choice and mutual care. Miriam's legacy would continue to live not only through Isis, but through all the lives she touched in the future. And that was the true immortality of love, its ability to multiply infinitely through the hearts it touches. 2 years had passed since Isis presented her family tree at school, and the Vasconcelos family had found a perfect rhythm of everyday happiness. Isis, now 13, had become an eloquent and determined teenager, maintaining her passion for drawing but also developing a growing interest in child psychology. Janie, at 15, was in high school and already dreaming of medical school. Pete, at 17, had become a responsible and dedicated young man with well-defined plans to study architecture. The Miriam Foundation, created by Ted and Claire, had become a reference point in the region, helping dozens of children in vulnerable situations. Isis actively participated in the projects, always with creative ideas to bring the assisted children closer to the possibility of adoption. But it was on a September morning, when Ted was turning 60, that an unexpected discovery brought a final twist to his already surprise-filled story. The birthday party had been organized by Claire with all her love, bringing together not only the family, but also the closest friends, company employees, and some of the families who had been helped by the foundation. It was a celebration of life, of earned love, and of battles won. In the middle of the party, Vinny approached Ted with a serious expression on his face. "Ted, I need to talk to you in private. It's important." They went to the house's office, away from the noise of the celebration. Vinny closed the door behind him and sat heavily in a chair. "What happened, Vinny?" "I received a call this morning. from a woman who claims to have information about ISIS's biological family. Ted felt his heart race. What kind of information? She identified herself as Teresa Santos, a retired nurse who worked for 40 years at St. Vincent's Hospital in Barra. She said she read about you in the Barra Times Argus and recognized some details about ISIS. What details? The moon-shaped birthmark that ISIS has behind her left ear, and the approximate date she was found abandoned at the church. Ted was silent, processing the information. ISIS's birthmark was indeed very specific, a small pink mark in the shape of a crescent moon that she always hid behind her hair. And what does this nurse know? She says she remembers a specific birth that happened 15 years ago. A 16-year-old girl who gave birth to a baby girl and then disappeared from the hospital during the early morning, taking the baby with her. And why does she remember this specific case? Because the young girl left a letter for the child. Teresa kept that letter all these years, hoping that one day the girl would appear. Does Teresa still have the letter? She does, and she wants to deliver it to ISIS personally. Ted stood up and walked to the window, watching his birthday party happen in the backyard. Isis was playing with the younger children, her hair swaying in the wind, her smile lighting up the entire afternoon. Vinny, do you think we should tell Isis? I think the decision should be hers. She's 13, old enough to choose whether she wants to know this part of her story. And if this letter brings her pain, what if it brings her peace? Ted, Isis has always shown herself to be mature in dealing with the complexities of her origin. Maybe it's time to give her the opportunity to know the whole truth. That night, after the guests had left and the house returned to silence, Ted and Claire talked to Isis about Teresa Santos's call. A letter from my birth mother, Isis repeated, processing the information. That's what the nurse says, Claire confirmed. But you don't have to read it if you don't want to. You can leave things as they are. Isis was silent for a long moment, looking through the window at the backyard where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. Can I think about it? Of course you can. There's no rush. And if I decide to read the letter, will you be upset? Isis, said Ted, following her to the backyard, your curiosity about your origins doesn't diminish in any way the love we have for you. You are our daughter, regardless of what we discover about your past. 3 days later, Isis made her decision. I want to meet Teresa Santos and read the letter. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the Vasconcelos house. Teresa Santos was a small and gentle woman, 70 years old, with completely white hair and very kind blue eyes. She carried an old leather bag, which she held as if it contained a treasure. Isis, she said as the girl approached, you are even more beautiful than I imagined. You have your mother's eyes. Did you know my mother? I did. She was a girl of only 16, very scared, but with an impressive determination to protect you. Teresa sat on the living room sofa with Isis next to her and Ted, Claire, and the other children nearby. Carefully, she took a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, from the bag. Your mother gave me this on the day you were born. She said that if you ever came looking for her, I should deliver this letter. What was her name? Marina Silva. She was 16 years old and alone in the world. What happened to her afterwards? Teresa sighed. I don't know, my dear. She disappeared the morning after giving birth, carrying you in her arms. That was the last time I saw her. Why did she disappear? She was very scared. She said that there were bad people after her, that it wasn't safe to stay in the hospital. Isis took the letter with trembling hands. Written on the envelope was, to my dearest daughter, when you grow up and want to know about your mommy. Can I read it now? Of course, my dear. Carefully, Isis opened the envelope and pulled out 2 sheets of paper with a youthful and uncertain handwriting. My beautiful little daughter, if you are reading this, it means you have grown up and want to know about me. I hope you have become a strong and happy girl, the way I always dreamed you would be. My name is Marina Silva. I'm 16 years old, and I'm your mommy. I have no family, no money, no home. All I have is you and a love so great that it hurts in my chest. I know I can't give you the life you deserve. I know that there are people in the world who can love you and take care of you better than I can. That's why I made the most difficult decision of my life. I'm going to leave you in a place where good people can find you. It's not because I don't love you, little daughter. It's exactly because I love you more than anything. Sometimes, to love means to let go. You have a moon-shaped mark behind your ear. I wanted you to have something just for yourself, something that would always remind you that you are special, unique in the world. When you grow up, I want you to know that you were wanted, that you were loved from the first moment. I want you to know that your mommy did everything to protect you, even if it meant staying away from you. If one day you have children, love them as I love you. And if one day you find a lost child like you were, help them find a good family. Your mommy who loves you forever, Marina P.S. Inside your blanket, I sewed a small red cloth heart. It's my heart that stays with you forever. Isis finished reading the letter with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of understanding, not of sadness. She loved me, she said simply. Very much, Teresa confirmed. I saw it in her eyes. It's the same love I see in your eyes when you look at her. Teresa, asked Ted, do you know what happened to Marina afterwards? I heard from comments from other employees that she was seen a few times in the bar area, always taking care of street children. Some said that she had dedicated herself to helping abandoned boys and girls. Isis raised her eyes, an expression of understanding coming into her face. Teresa, did anyone happen to mention if she had curly hair? She did, yes. Black curly hair, very beautiful. And a small scar on her chin? Teresa frowned, thinking, now that you mention it, yes, I think she had a mark on her face. The silence that followed was charged with an extraordinary revelation. Everyone in the room began to connect the pieces of the puzzle at the same time. Isis, Claire said with a choked voice. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Marina, Miriam, Isis whispered. They're very similar, and the age. If Marina was 16 when I was born, she would have been 18 when she arrived at the slums. And if Marina was Miriam, asked Janie, who had followed the entire conversation in silence. It would be impossible, said Ted, but his voice didn't carry conviction. Teresa looked at everyone, confused. Did you know someone called Miriam? We knew her, Isis replied. And now I think I understand why she took care of me so lovingly. It wasn't just because we were similar, it was because she was your biological mother, Pete completed. The revelation changed everything, and nothing at the same time. If Miriam really was Marina, then she had spent years taking care of her own daughter without revealing the truth. She had created an elaborate story to protect both Isis and Ted from the complexity of the real situation. Isis, said Ted, if this is true, how do you feel? Isis looked at the letter in her hands, then at the family gathered around her. I feel complete. Now I understand why I always felt so connected with Miriam, and I understand why she brought me to you. How so? She wasn't just honoring the memory of your daughter. She was placing her own daughter in a family she knew would love her forever. The depth of the discovery left everyone emotional. If the theory was correct, Miriam had orchestrated not only the reunion between father and adoptive daughter, but had also ensured that her own biological daughter grew up in a loving family. Dad, said Isis, using the word with even more affection, does this change anything for you? It changes everything, Ted replied, hugging her. Now I know that I not only gained a daughter by heart, but maybe I gained a granddaughter that Miriam left for me to take care of. And for me, what does it mean? It means that you are doubly ours, by adoption and by blood, by choice and by destiny. Isis smiled, that smile that had lit up their lives since the first day. Then we really are a family in every possible way. And so, the story that had begun with the cry of a desperate child found its final truth. Miriam's love had been even deeper and more complex than anyone could imagine. She had protected her daughter, honored her father, and created a family that transcended all conventional definitions. The circle was finally complete, and love had overcome all adversities. 10 years had passed since the revelation that Miriam and Marina were the same person, and the Vasconcelos family had grown in ways that no one could have imagined. Isis, now 23, had graduated in psychology and worked at the Miriam Foundation itself, specializing in cases of adoption and children in vulnerable situations. Janie, at 25, was a respected pediatrician, working in the same hospital where Teresa Santos had spent 40 years of her life. Pete, at 27, had become a successful architect, designing homes especially designed for adoptive families. Ted, now 70, had passed the presidency of the company to a trusted partner, dedicating himself entirely to the foundation and the family that had become the center of his existence. Claire, at 68, had discovered a late vocation for early childhood education and coordinated a literacy project for underprivileged children. The Vasconcelos house had become a meeting point for dozens of families that had formed through adoption. Every month they organized a special lunch where children, adoptive parents, and young people who had grown up in the system gathered to share experiences and strengthen community ties. But it was on a sunny March morning, exactly 20 years after the first meeting between Ted and Isis on Main Street, that the family gathered for a very special celebration. "Dad," said Isis, entering the kitchen where Ted was drinking his morning coffee while reading the Bari Times Argus, "can I talk to you about something important?" "Of course, my daughter. What happened?" Isis sat next to him, with that same radiant smile that had conquered his heart 2 decades ago. "I want to tell you some news that will make you very happy." "What news?" "Fernando and I are getting married at the end of the year. And there's more. We're thinking about adopting a child." Fernando was a psychologist who worked with Isis at the foundation, a kind and dedicated young man who had won over the entire Vasconcelos family with his gentleness and commitment to social work. Ted smiled, touched. "Isis, what wonderful news. Claire will be thrilled." "But the news doesn't stop there, Dad. Fernando and I have already found the child we want to adopt." "Already?" "He's a 5-year-old boy named Gabriel. He's been in a shelter in Barra for 2 years after his biological parents lost custody due to neglect." Isis showed a photo on her cell phone. A little boy with brown hair and big, sad eyes, who reminded her a lot of herself at the age she was found by Ted. "He reminds me of someone," Ted commented, observing the photo. "He really does. And you know what else? Gabriel has an incredible talent for drawing. He spends all day drawing birds, just like I used to." "Birds?" "Birds flying, always flying away. When I asked him why he always drew the same thing, he said that the birds are free and can go wherever they want." Ted felt a familiar shiver run down his spine. It was as if history was repeating itself, but this time with his daughter in the role of savior. "Isis, are you sure you want to take on this responsibility?" I'm absolutely sure, Dad. Gabriel needs a family, and I know exactly what it's like to be in his place. I know what it's like to wait for someone who loves you for real. That afternoon, the whole family gathered to meet Gabriel. The meeting was organized at the shelter itself, a much better structured place than the places where ISIS had lived, but which still carried that atmosphere of waiting that characterized the lives of children without families. Gabriel was exactly as ISIS had described him, shy, observant, with an impressive talent for art. When Ted introduced himself as ISIS's grandfather, the boy raised his big eyes and asked, "Are you going to be my grandpa too?" "If you want, yes. I've never had a grandpa. What's it like?" Ted knelt down to the boy's height. Grandpa is someone who tells stories, who gives you a hug when you're sad, who teaches you important things, and who loves you without asking for anything in return. Like Mom and Dad? Like that, but with a difference. Grandpa has lived a lot and knows that time passes quickly, so he enjoys every moment with his grandchildren as if it were the most important thing in the world. Gabriel smiled shyly. "Can I call you Grandpa?" "Ted." "You can, my grandson." Gabriel's adoption process was surprisingly quick, facilitated by the family's experience with similar cases and the Miriam Foundation's reputation. Within 6 months, he was officially integrated into the Vasconcelos family. The adaptation was easier than anyone expected. Gabriel was a loving and intelligent child who quickly flourished in the loving environment he found. His drawings, once dark and melancholic, became colorful and cheerful. Instead of birds flying away, he began to draw birds singing in trees full of flowers. On the day of Isis and Fernando's wedding, celebrated in the Vasconcelos backyard, Gabriel was the proudest ring-bearer ever. Dressed in a small navy blue tuxedo, he carried the rings with the seriousness of someone who knew he was participating in something very important. "Grandpa Ted," he said during the party, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, my grandson." "Why is our family so different from other families?" "Different how?" "Other families are all alike. Ours has people who came from different places, different colors, different ages." Ted smiled, observing the party around him. Isis danced with Fernando, radiant in her white dress. Janie chatted animatedly with co-workers. Pete helped serve. The guests. Claire coordinated everything with the efficiency of someone who had become an expert in organizing family gatherings. "Gabriel, our family is special because it was built with choices, not with chance. Each person here chose to love and be loved. That makes our bonds stronger than any blood ties." "And Aunt Miriam? Did she also choose our family?" Gabriel had grown up hearing stories about Miriam, and for him, she was an almost mythical figure. Budun, the sister-mother, who had made all that happiness possible. "Aunt Miriam not only chose our family, Gabriel, she created it. Every person who is here today is here because she planted the seeds of love that brought us together." "Does she still take care of us?" "I'm sure she does. Every time a child finds a family, every time someone chooses to love instead of judge, every time a sad story turns into a happy story, Aunt Miriam is there, smiling." That night, after the guests had left and the house returned to silence, 4 generations of the Vasconcelos family gathered on the porch. Ted and Claire, Isis and Fernando, Gabriel running through the yard chasing fireflies. "Dad," said Isis, watching Gabriel play, "thank you for teaching me that family has no limits. You were the one who taught me that, my daughter. You and Miriam. And now Gabriel will learn the same thing. And he will teach it to his children, and they to their children. Miriam's love will multiply forever." Gabriel approached the group, holding a firefly carefully between his cupped hands. "Grandpa, can I make a wish for the firefly?" "Of course. My grandson, what wish do you want to make?" "I want to wish that our family will be happy forever, that we never separate, and that when I grow up, I can also help other children like you helped me." Gabriel blew gently, and the firefly flew upwards, its light flashing among the stars before disappearing into the darkness. "I think he took your wish to heaven," said Ted, hugging his grandson. "Grandpa, do you think Aunt Miriam heard my wish?" Ted looked at the stars, thinking of his daughter who had left so young but had left an eternal legacy of love. "I'm sure she heard you, Gabriel, and I'm sure she is very proud of the family she created." That night, for the first time in 20 years, Ted felt no longing, no pain, no regret. He felt only gratitude. Gratitude for having been chosen to be part of that extraordinary story of love, redemption, and family. The girl who had cried desperately on a street in Bara 20 years ago had become a strong and loving woman who now saved other children. The man who had felt guilty and lost had become a patriarch of a family united by unconditional love. And the daughter who had left too young had become immortal through the love she had planted in every heart she touched. The story had reached its perfect ending, but it was an ending that was also a new beginning. Because true love never ends, it only transforms, multiplies, and continues to write new stories through the generations. And somewhere in the stars, Miriam smiled, knowing that her mission had been fulfilled more perfectly than she could ever have dreamed.